IT workers. Who are the most enraging people you have to put up with? I've worked in IT for a few years now and have been messing around with computers of my own and fixing them for friends as far back as I can remember. I understand that not everyone is good with computers. If they were, I wouldn't have a job. I have no problem helping people through things, giving them information, or fixing things. What I do have a problem with is people who mess that crap up and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about when I tell them how to fix it or how I already fixed it. Oh yeah, your hard drive is completely corrupt. If you listen, you can actually hear it grinding on the inside there. There's nothing I can reasonably do to fix that. But I need my files. I'm sorry, the drive is physically broken. I can't recover anything from it. I thought you were good with computers. I'm just telling you what I found out. Well, it wasn't that bad before I bought it to you. You broke it. Frick these people. Someone came into our retail store and asked to buy a windproof router because the wind keeps blowing my Wi-Fi signal away. I'm pretty sure my eyes started bleeding. The person told me, the game won't run. It's telling me I need to update my graphics drivers if I want to play. What should I do? Update your graphics card drivers. Oh, okay, thanks. Telling everyone when they come into work that the internet is down because she can't view one particular website. The computer forgot my password. No, I swear I've tried it like 30 times and it doesn't work. It keeps saying locked out. I feel like I did most of these when I was a child or in my early teens, so the fact that there are apparently multiple adults, presumably with office, computer-based jobs, who are doing these sorts of things constantly is frankly upsetting. This woman called my college help desk, she was a professor, and told me that her dead brother-in-law was controlling her PC. She also wanted to tell me that she's not crazy. Turns out her batteries were going in her wireless mouse and the cursor was just moving around kinda funny. My 64-year-old colleague said, I've just had it with this computer. I can't even find the internet. I say, you're using it right now to see your Gmail. No, this is my Google. I need the internet. And a few people here are saying, well, they're old, and that would be a valid excuse, but this person's position revolved greatly around data entry in a course and program management system for a college. One of our management systems is run off a website called AITA. Knowing how to access the internet is a good idea for that job. The other day, the office manager was trying to send out a message on our mailing list program. She asked, how do I create a new email? Oh, you see at the top there where it says Create Mail? Oh, where do I put the email name? Oh, look at the top where it says Email Name. Oh, where do I select which email list to send it to? See at the top where it says Email List? And on and on and on for 20 minutes. The instructions are all right there. I swear half the time these people act like my job is to read things to them. At that point, I start reversing the process and ask them to find it for me. Can you find a button that looks like it relates to creating an email? And when they argue, I tell them the true fact that telling someone where something is only reinforces to their brain that they don't need to remember it, whereas finding it for themselves helps them remember. Then they tell me to shut up and tell them where the button is. I wrote a script to do some maintenance on the computers on the network after hours. Clear temporary files, garbage files, defrag, among others. As you know, no one else does this, and I was having to manually do it on a few computers, so I figured I'd script it out and do it to everyone, and get it all done at once over the weekend. Monday morning, all hell breaks loose. Apparently, the number 2 in the office had been storing all of her important files in the recycle bin. Not on the network share like everyone else, but files created on the desktop and then deleted. In which she had opened the recycle bin, undelete, and they'd be back on the desktop. Unfortunately, I had no backups, as the backup procedures I had did not in fact back up the recycle bin on all the computers. I ended up pulling a 50-hour shift redacting and trying to manually put the files back, of which I got about 80% of them despite the defrag. I was in deep crap for about 2 months after that. This was back in 2003 when disk space was more of an issue and multiple desktops had out-of-disk space crashes, in which I manually fixed. I just decided after doing the 4th one to write a script to do the whole network, and yes, I did give notice on the Tuesday before Friday when I executed it. Some people just make silly mistakes. I'm pretty sure I googled Google before these things never hurt anyone. I once worked for someone who didn't think that IT needed access to network drives to back them up. It's so much more dangerous when you can't do your job. Also, she read some book about lean and IT and only took some weird amalgamation of streamlining software to reduce the number of mouse clicks. So our test scripts literally counted mouse clicks and I had to recode modules because there were too many touches. So instead of making intuitive interfaces, I had to worry about clicks. I wish I were kidding. I had a boss that prided himself on never touching a computer. Web TV was the greatest thing ever, so the company website had to be built around Web TV. They also insisted on having a gosh-awful MIDI file playing on the website. I had to fake takedown notice emails from the RIAA to get him to finally remove it. I never understood how people can take pride in not knowing something. When everything works, why do we even pay you IT guys? And when one thing is broken, why do we even pay you IT guys? Yeah, it seems like a pretty thankless task. Hopefully there are at least a few people who know that when everything is working perfectly, it's actually a sign that IT are doing their jobs wonderfully. I don't get mad at people for not knowing things anymore. That's fine. Really, the things that miff me these days are the following statements. It's not my job to learn how to do that. Oh, I'm computer illiterate. Computers hate me. That kind of thing. Externalizing the problems and not taking ownership of the fact that working with technology is part of your job, and using the "I'm just not a computer person" mantra as an excuse to remain willfully ignorant. I did recently have a user screenshot a problem, paste it into Word, and then fax it to me to open a ticket. That was pretty funny. During a large-scale worm outbreak several years ago, the building one of our guys was working damage control in lost power. It was during a severe thunderstorm. One of our users looked at him, wide-eyed, and shakily asked, Did the virus do that? I rebooted. No, you didn't. Your PC takes 2 minutes to reboot, so you've either lied, logged off and back in, turned the monitor on and off, or did something else. I told you to click Start, version dependent, next step, and then restart. You ignored me and did something else. Cease your lying and/or not listening to me ways. I don't care if you don't want to reboot, it'll fix your problem. Otherwise, I'd tell you not to move so I can see the issue myself. Oh, is this the part where you take over my screen? I don't like it. It's scary, like a ghost. I rarely begrudge someone for not understanding what I do. I'm sure I've said some stupid things about other people's areas of expertise. What I do get irked over is when it's trivialized. I've had a couple of people who barely know me approach me with a big idea that they'd like to get off the ground. One guy wanted to make a World of Warcraft clone, more or less. He knows I write software, but no idea what I do. I work on big data systems and the like. So to him, a programmer is just a programmer. No matter that I know as much about how to make a game like World of Warcraft as I know about brain surgery. But I do know enough to know that one programmer who is not even tangentially related to the end product in expertise is probably not going to get the job done. He had no clue about what making a game like that entailed. I think he figured that Blizzard was run by 4 guys in a garage or something. Another guy had a brilliant idea for a website. Hint, it's a crappy idea. Hilariously crappy. He has no business experience, no development experience, no marketing experience. But he tells me the classic line, I'll give you 5% ownership. Ownership in what? Your pipe dreams? And then I tell him, no thanks, and it's always the same. You have no idea of what you're missing out on. Oh, but I do, and I'm really not missing much. People have no clue about how much work goes into the stuff they use. They figure that since Google is only a logo and a single text box, it should be super duper easy to create that part. I don't need the maps created at first, we just need a search engine, and then we can make one that's better than Google. Once it's running, we'll start working on a new map thing, which is another actual line I've been pitched. Right, because nobody else is trying to do that right now. Search Bing for Google alternatives and let me know what you find. You know, besides irony, the idea guy is the most useless person out there. If all you have is an idea and you're going to pitch it to a developer, save yourself the time and just ask him to say no thanks to you in advance. Anyone who agrees won't be competent. Anyone who's competent won't agree. I've been in IT for longer than I care to admit, but my absolute favorite, well, a coworker came to look over my shoulder while I was working on an application. She looked at my browser and said, "Why does that say Mozilla Firefox?" "Because I'm using the Firefox browser." "Mine doesn't say that." "You may not be using the Firefox browser then." She goes back to her desk and calls me. "It says Internet Explorer." "That's because you're using Internet Explorer." "Make it go away." "What?" "Make it go away." "Make what go away?" "I don't want it to say Internet Explorer on my machine, and I don't want it to say Mozilla Firefox on your machine. Make it go away." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm not IT and it wasn't enraging, but my mother called me once from her new iPhone 4S and said, "I can't get the phone to stop playing music. The only reason it's stopped is because I've called you. Help me." "Press pause, Mum." It was more funny than anything. Did you really just tell me to turn it off and on again? I hope you're making a joke and referencing the IT crowd. Yes, your computer missed the group policy update and you need to log out and back in. Shut up and let me do my job. It's not really something they told me, but the act of washing your hands in pizza grease and then touching every part of my screen. Sweet Lord, have I accidentally come into a story submission for IT staff at a kindergarten? Because surely there are no adults getting pizza prints all over someone's LCD screen. That's outrageous. Customer, I changed my password and I can't use my computer anymore. So I say, "Alright, I can probably reset it. Do you know what operating system you're using?" Blank stare from the other end. I say, "Some OSs are easier to reset than others. I need to know what OS you're using." "Oh, I'm on the Comcast Internet Pipeline operating system." "Awesome. So that's actually your internet provider. When you turn on the computer, what does the screen look like?" Blank stare. Does it say Windows 98, Windows ME, Windows XP, Windows 2000, Windows Vista, or Windows 7? Wait. Is it even a Microsoft product you're using, or a Mac? Of course it's not a Mac, silly. I don't have the money for a Mac. So what operating system is it running? Blank stare. Never mind. Just bring your computer in. It's going to be $200. So, I have a printer with a USB cable coming out of it and a USB port on my computer. How do I plug it in? I think a part of me died a little bit when I heard that. It's broken. Why is it that clients are always so vague? Just because you mistyped an email address or didn't plug it in or chose the wrong printer, it doesn't mean your computer is broken. People assume that we know how to program websites and iPhone apps because we know how to set up telco or replace your hard drive. Nothing happens when I click the link. Nothing happens is client speak for, "The thing I expect to happen doesn't happen." If someone tells me they click a button and nothing happens, the one thing I can absolutely guarantee is that something does happen, something interesting and diagnostically important, which the client refuses to put into any other words than "nothing happens." Maybe they get an error message, maybe they get a white screen, maybe an Ajax loading GIF appears, but hangs there forever. Maybe the browser crashes altogether. Maybe the whole computer crashes, catches fire, and quickly spreads, killing the client's newborn infant. The client will still describe this as, "I tried, but nothing happened." Ugh, what do you even do here then? When I told her I had to wait for the vendor to contact me back after they looked at the issue, I calmly said, "I make sure you can do your job," and then I just walked out of her office. Most EUs have no idea their programs are from a specific vendor who is the go-to source when stuff hits the fan, like today. You can't win, really. Every once in a while you have these small victories. Someone has a problem, you remote into their workstation, it's something easy, you click through a few menus quickly, and some screens which look impressive because of all the numbers and tech jargon, and then presto, they think you're a hero. But most of this job is waiting. Waiting for when you're needed if you don't have anything else which needs to be done, or you're in a panic when things go wrong. It's extremely stressful. It's either, why are we paying him if all he seems to do is sit around, or why are we paying him if these things go down? You're damned if you do, and damned if you don't. What version of Windows do you have? XP? 7? 8.1? Internet Explorer 10. Most times when someone sees me doing something in the command prompt or terminal for any reason, apparently I'm hacking. No, I'm not hacking, I'm updating my software. No, I'm not hacking, I'm talking on IRC. Friend going to college for computer science and needed a new laptop. We were having a conversation about what to download first. I said, you should probably get something like Chrome or something similar as the very first thing. I use Internet Explorer. I don't like those other ones, they give you viruses. She got a virus within a week on her brand new laptop. Going to college for computer sciences. I couldn't facepalm hard enough. Are you in Windows 7? XP? I don't know, I'm not a computer expert. Are you an expert in being a total moron then? My memory stick comes up as FAT32. Does that mean I've got too much stuff on it? Is it saying it's too fat? True fricking story. No way. The narrator refuses to believe that this one is true. I can't exist on a planet where someone believes that the IT pioneers of the world decided to indicate a drive has reached capacity by fat-shaming it. I don't want to be in the same species that has this. Those that hover over my shoulder asking questions that only slow me down. What's that? Why do you do that? How does that work? What are you doing? Honestly, I don't even mind being asked questions 99% of the time. What irks me are the people that have 50 million irrelevant questions that actually slow down my progress and interrupt my train of thought. If you want me to train you on how to do my job, you're getting an invoice that has a line item for X hours of training at $1,500 an hour. Then there's those people that used to be in IT years ago and somehow feel that makes them the experts. You were in IT. You've been out for 20 years. I've been doing this for the past 15 years. I'm the damn expert. Quit telling me how to do my job. You're wrong. Sit down and let me get you back to doing what you are the expert at now, which is not IT. I could do your job. Good, so I can go back to doing something useful and you'll take care of your own problems from now on. I find things other so-called techies say are more enraging. However, a few years ago, I had a client that wanted her PC cleaned up. In the end, I installed MSE and MBAM and configured it. A few months later, I got an email from her. She says she might have a virus and for me to check into it. I remote in and see that MSE is gone and Symantec AV is installed. I ask why she removed MSE and brought Symantec. She started her answer with, well, I felt, and I just stopped listening to her feelings reason. Soldiered on, fixed her problem, and sent her a bill. In short, some people don't think they get a good product unless they pay for it. I've seen this in different areas of business. I work in a call center. Outside of work, I'm as IT as you can get, fixing computers and whatnot. My day job is dealing with calls about people's accounts at a credit union. I enjoy it for the most part, aside from the fact that we have to tell our members about services that we offer, and we have to refer 10% of our calls. So this one girl calls, I check the date of birth and she's 19, calling for her balance. The first thing I do is ask if she uses our online banking, as I get a referral and she's young enough not to use the excuse of not knowing how. She responds, no, well, I don't know. I mean, I look at my balances on my phone, but I never go online. Frustration intensifies. When I sit down at a user's machine to put my talent and years of training and experience to work, and they say, when you're done playing with it, let me know so I can get some real work done. On a computer that they need to do their job, that they screwed up with their quest for pretty wallpapers or cute animated mouse pointers or great deals on vacations or fortunes from Nigerian princes or whatever. Ugh, there are so many annoying things that users do. Emailing simply with, my insert device or software is broken. Please try to elaborate, explain what you're doing and what happens. It's a complete waste of my time to have to probe you for information like you're 15 years old. On the same vein, they complain that the problem hasn't been resolved, but they never responded to your attempts to get more information. They'll walk into my office, stand there for 5 minutes while I'm on the phone with someone else because they just couldn't wait and their problem is incredibly important. It's a distraction to the problem I'm working on and unfair to all the other users who submitted their questions and issues correctly. 9 out of 10 times, it's not an emergent issue that needs my attention immediately. There's times where the company board say, sorry, we don't have any money to spend on that. And we really need to replace machines that are broken beyond repair. Meanwhile, they have enough money to buy water columns for the waiting room that bubble up constantly. It's to the point that I'm telling people to complain to the doctors on the board, constant due date for projects that just aren't possible, opening multiple new offices at the same time for a 3-person department, while also still being responsible for other projects and daily help desk support. They demo new software that clearly won't work, then buy it and tell us to make it work. They get upset when we can't deliver that or it takes a while. I just had a user come into my office to ask me to order her a new headset for her phone. I told her she'd need to speak to finance, but while discussing it, she explained further. People she's on the phone with constantly can't hear her, and she ends up yelling so they can. I tell her, why don't you bring it here first and see if we can't fix it? She gets the headset and I'm able to determine it's the voice tube. In the end, it's solved, no extra money spent. I don't understand why she wouldn't just let me know she was having an issue. I constantly have users that won't call or email to let us know about their issues. They'll do one of two things. Wait until I happen to be at their locations, which I've only left enough time for the issue that I came for, or they wait until it's thoroughly upset them and then send me an email with expletives complaining about the issue. They do not explain the problem, just complain. As an IT person, I can understand that not everyone has levels of knowledge about electronics that I do. When I've explained the simple things to you multiple times, that's when I get upset. I shouldn't have to show you how to attach something to your email every single time you do it. Either take a note or Google it at that point. I'm not your personal IT professional, I support an entire company of people who have issues. Yes, your simple thing comes across as a waste of my time. What happened at your job that felt like something straight out of The Office? My father left his old job because they created the committee. They kept creating committees for things and kept having to decide who would be on them, so they created a committee whose sole purpose was to select members of other committees. I once broke wind at work and my cubicle is by the kitchen. My manager walks by my cubicle and says, what is that smell? Smells like someone's warming up their dinner from last night. I could not stop laughing in my mind after he said that. I used to work testing bloods in a biohazard hood. It's a glass chamber thingy with venting fans and gas lines for when you need to use Bunsen burners or whatever. Anyways, I tooted and it ended up being so rancid that my coworkers called security to check for gas leaks. I didn't have the heart to take the blame. I work in a large office and the president of the company rode around on a fricking Segway. I remember attending a meeting once and he segwayed in, stood on the fricking thing to deliver his presentation, and then segwayed out of the room like he was riding a gosh darn Roman chariot. We had a meeting about how we were having too many meetings. I work for a smaller non-profit. The boss sends out an email about limiting use on the color copier because we need to save money and the color tones are expensive. Fine, I only print in black and white most of the time anyway. Next day, she calls me down to help troubleshoot her wireless connection to the printer. One, it turns out the connection has always been fine, but what she actually needs is help formatting a document before it gets printed. The document is Harry Potter-themed birthday invites in deep scarlet and gold color scheme for her daughter's upcoming birthday party. And two, she then proceeds to test print the invites 10 times before actually printing the 35 sheets that she really needed. This was a year ago. I'm still going out of my way to print full-color copies. HR held a seminar on diversity in the workplace. HR rep proceeded to ask what we like for Thanksgiving. We all answered things like turkey or stuffing, etc. The one black guy answers turkey as well. The HR rep then stopped the meeting, pointed at him and said, "You know, in my experience with the African American community, you all typically like macaroni." She lost her job a few days later. All true, no lies. What the actual crap? Who took Michael Scott and Toby and switched their roles? That's wild. I guess that also means that the boss was a mild-mannered, ineffectual man who's never made a sale, so everyone loses in that situation. Years ago, delivering pizza, my boss was a huge man-baby and was upset with me about something stupid. I was up for a double delivery, which was more rare than you'd think, and I'd get an extra $1 for the same trip out of the store. So to punish me, he only gave me one and gave the other to the next driver up. Well, the deliveries weren't just close, they were to the exact same place. For some reason, the customer just made 2 separate orders. Maybe to use 2 different cards, otherwise they would have just updated the order. We even told my boss as we were taking the order, but he didn't care. He had already made up his mind about this stupid punishment for me, even though you could tell he was realizing how dumb it was. So here we are, two delivery dudes from the same place, delivering to the same place. And the customer actually says, "Damn, I specifically asked them not to send two people." As though that wouldn't be totally obvious, and he's still got two people. Last year, on Ugly Christmas Sweater Day, coworker A didn't have a sweater to wear. Coworker B offered to loan one to her. The day of, person A arrived wearing a Christmas sweater, and B remarked to A that, having found an ugly sweater to wear, she'd no longer need to borrow one, at which point coworker A broke into tears and exclaimed, "My mom knitted this sweater for me." HR got involved. Hilarious. My boss was obviously sleeping with a coworker. He referred to his new girlfriend as his dream woman and described her exactly but wouldn't tell me her name. It was so awkwardly, painfully obvious who he was talking about, but after I easily guessed that it was her, his eyes went huge and he sat there for a moment in slack-jawed panic. Then he blurted out, "No, it's not her, I hate her." A few days later, he comes into my office and says, "Okay, listen, I know you want to know the name of my dream woman," and he invented the name Barb for her and told me about how he's so excited that she's introducing him to her friends and it feels like they're a real couple. Except every time he meant to say Barb, he accidentally said my coworker's name instead. Each time I corrected him, he said, "Right, not her, I mean Barb." After he told me the story about Barb, he walked out of the office with a devilish half-smile expression, like he was pretty sure he fooled me and got away with it. My boss, coming in from a walk to the Target a few stores over in the shopping center, said, "Guess what I found all the way over in the parking lot at Target?" My idiot coworker said, "Was it a rat?" "No. Was it a dead rat?" "It wasn't a rat. It was one of our shopping carts, but that part doesn't matter. Just the fact that she thought it still could have been a rat after he said no the first time and thought the clarification dead would be the right guess was really funny to me. We had an equal opportunity training that tricked people into choosing a minister and his family as ideal neighbors. It was revealed that they were satanic ministers and regularly did animal sacrifices. I printed out the 12 tenets of Satanism, which states that you are to never harm animals, and filed an equal opportunity complaint against the equal opportunity training. I'm not a Satanist, just a guy who likes to cause trouble. Once during training on how to deal with people who don't want to be alive anymore, I told the leader that I was pro-choice when he asked me about self-deletion. He couldn't decide if that was a legitimate option. My boss had a dream. When she describes it, it sounded more like a nightmare, but she didn't see it that way. She described this dream of being locked in a room with only a single door. At one point, some big men in suits opened the door and without saying a word threw a gutted pig into the room and closed the door. She came to work, told us about this dream, and then asked for a few co-workers to help her Google what it meant. When they looked it up and broke down the different symbols in it, F my life, they came to the conclusion that it wasn't good. Who would have guessed, right? The boss didn't like their assessment, so she started arguing about the different ways you could interpret a dead pig being thrown at you by mafia types. The sales manager pulled a real Dwight. I guess to save money and prove that nobody would know the difference, he cancelled bottled water deliveries and started refilling them secretly with tap water. People noticed immediately, and it was stupid anyway because the company was doing well at the time. Whatever savings were irrelevant. Wow, he really shrewded that one. Way to save a couple of dimes and make everyone hate you, pal. And this guy wasn't even in charge of admin or the office at large. Who cares that much about something like that at work? Oh, right. Dwight Schrute. My co-workers and I currently are in a large office-style feud. We've broken up into teams at my company and we're all pretty loyal to our teams and heavily differ personality-wise per team. Our office is about a month away from major renovations, desks are moving, spaces are shifting. It's a huge all-out war for desk spaces that's turned into heated arguments. We all separate and talk crap about opposing teams in meetings. It's been a lot of fun. Had a woman when I first started at my company who had all sorts of TMI problems, but my favorite was the day she accidentally crapped her pants. Instead of discreetly going to clean herself up and returning to her desk, or taking care of it on lunch or whatever a better solution would have been, She went to the bathroom, placed her soiled undies in a bag, and casually walked out of the office, stopping by every single desk to let us know that she had had an accident and was going home to get new undies. Like she was proud of her chocolatey trophy or something. It was bizarre. She quit a week later because God told her to. In the same day, I was both commended and reprimanded for the same thing. Certificates and everything. I'd been helping out around the office with jobs that people didn't want to do, and helping cover different departments when our business was experiencing a tough year with employee illnesses. An hour after getting the certificate from the department director and CEO, my boss pulls me and says I'm not pulling my weight and need to stop being so nice to other people. I didn't even know how to respond, and he couldn't figure out how to explain what I actually did wrong. Weird day. Our bookkeeper used lol at the end of text messages to the general manager. He thought it meant lots of love, so she was let go because he thought she was coming on to him. A crazy nurse trapped a young, new employee in the nurse's station and proceeded to spend an hour driving the new employee through the nurse's hometown on Google Maps, a small boring Canadian suburb, all the while exclaiming things like, "And this is where my friend lived," and "this is where the hospital was, only 15 minutes from my house," while this new employee made help eyes at me from the office. It feels like it could have been Michael and Ryan when he was a temp. My office is preparing to let some people work from home, but they're going to require a webcam which will be used to ensure that a dress code is being followed while working from home. I found out today, and honestly it got me a little depressed. That I'm associated with people that think like this feels like some tremendous personal failing. Hippie coworker went to spend the summer out in the woods, way out west with no cell phone. I asked, what if there's an emergency? What if there's a bear? Well, that's a noble way to go out of this life. I can't figure out if he's Creed or Dwight. There's been a war over keeping our water cooler or not between our CTO and our CSR manager for over a year. As the guy who sits beside it, there's nothing more fun than listening to the CTO claim that they're supporting a small, family-run bottling company, the water comes from a major brand, and saying how the recycled jugs along with the jobs provided by us using the water support the economy. Counter-arguments are that we have a filtered water dispenser not 10 feet from the water cooler, the waste and plastics used for the jugs, the CO2 equivalent emissions from the delivery truck, among other things. Really, the CTO just likes the taste better and prefers the two temperatures, like the almost ice-cold one and the sipping hot one. The CSR manager is slowly winning by reducing the order of water we make every couple of weeks. Their banter is incredible though, and I love that we have microwavable popcorn in the office for these occasions. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had a boss at a local TV studio that got the job because his father used to be the boss. He had 0 qualifications but acted like he could do no wrong. One time he chewed me out for losing a battery off of one of the cameras. We were standing in front of his office and I waited for him to finish his rather long-winded speech about negligence, the cost of replacing a battery, and how he'd never have let this happen if he'd been in charge of the batteries. After he finished, I pointed at the battery sitting in the middle of his desk and told him, "I think I found the battery. I've never seen a man more red-faced." Called him out. I wonder if this was followed by a Michael Scott-style immediate ending of the meeting, or this guy being way worse and having it out for you from that point on. Because if this channel has taught me anything, it's that those kinds of people do exist and are probably worse than Steve Carell's character at their jobs. When I worked a sort of telemarketing job, I sat next to this guy who didn't really seem to grasp the concept of the job at all. I'd sometimes overhear him while I was waiting for someone to pick up, and he was just a mess, tripping over his words constantly. Once I glanced over at his screen and saw how he had been on one call for over 40 minutes. I frantically nudged him and he muted it, asking what was up. I told him if he didn't ask for money soon and end the call, he might get fired, or at least reprimanded again. His response was, "Oh, but he's pretty fun to talk to. He already told me he doesn't want to donate like a long time ago. It was basically just like Michael Scott totally failing at the second telemarketing job. I worked retail and moved stores. A few months later, my female Michael Scott boss was also moved to my store. Everyone was asking me what she was like and what to expect, and all I could say was, "You just have to wait and see for yourself." Everyone was so excited to meet her on the first day. They all showed up early to greet her, and she was about 45 minutes late. Walks into the store, and the first thing she says is, "Sorry I'm late. I had to wait for my husband to get up and do my hemorrhoid cream before I left." My boss literally brought a PS4 for a white elephant exchange. Exactly as much of a disaster as that episode with the iPod. My former boss decided that since she was leaving, she'd throw a going-away party for herself. Usually, close friends or workmates will put together a nice get-together to send them off. She had managed to annoy nearly everyone she worked with at one time or another, except for the head of the organization. So she provides the list of people she wants invited, as well as the people she wanted not to attend, where and when, and decides a theme. The theme was pet speed dating. It was some sort of inside joke she'd suggested and had decided that this would be the theme. I met a few of the people besides workmates at the party. It was a few members of the public that were very active on the organization's email list and who had no real lives except to say that they were very interested in getting stuff for free. It was an odd mix of people in an uncomfortable setting at an event that was exceptionally weird to honor a person that no one really liked or felt any warmth for at all. Odd all around. Muffins are provided at staff meetings. The big kind with chocolate chips and those waxy wrappers. Sort of weird dude I work with starts eating his. Finishes, then folds the wrapper into a triangle, stuffs it in his mouth, chews and swallows. Like it's just the most natural thing in the world. I didn't believe my eyes, but then I locked eyes with someone from another department, and the look of pure confusion and shock on his face told me that he too had witnessed it. By the next meeting, a small group of non-believers were on the lookout with the two of us, and sure enough, strange coworker does it again. By the meeting after next, basically the entire staff was watching this guy eat his muffin wrapper. I'm fearful that management will notice and will stop providing muffins because at this point, no one in that room is paying attention to a damn thing they say. We all just watch the weird guy enjoy his muffin and wait to see him eat the wrapper. I really used to hate the meetings, but this has made them much more enjoyable. The big boss scheduled an optional meeting to discuss results of a work survey. No one showed up as it was a very busy time of year and we had an intense schedule. So he sat alone in the meeting room for a few minutes, came out and announced that he'd hold the meeting out in the office. Regularly stopped talking to tell people trying to work to stop and listen as this was important. The big survey result was that people felt like they didn't have enough time to get work done. No one got their work done on time that day either. I'm a UPS package handler, rest in peace me, as of 2 weeks ago, and during training we had a conversation that went like this. The training guy said, "Okay guys, here's your workbooks, please open to page 13 and put today's date. Today we're going to talk about hazmat packages. Again, page 13 and write today's date." One employee immediately asks, "What date should we write down?" My trainer literally gave the most done face and looked off into an imaginary camera. My boss started calling people hosers out of nowhere. It seems like she's doing it to be cool. She's a 60-year-old, fairly uptight lady and is pretty far from cool, and she won't stop. There was one guy saying how he wouldn't be okay with dating a bisexual girl, but would be okay with dating a lesbian. So then we ask him, why would a lesbian be attracted to you? There was me and one other guy questioning him, but he just didn't understand. Yep, that's a Kevin level of IQ right there. The more of these stories that I read, the more certain I am that The Office is not the loopy, cartoonish depiction of office life that I kind of thought it was. I mean, sure, it had real-ish moments, but I kind of thought the rest had no basis in reality. Perhaps I was wrong. A former coworker of mine would commute to work via bicycle every day. He kept a pair of comfortable work shoes at work and wore cycling-specific shoes when on the bike. He bragged about his work shoes pretty regularly, always talking about how they were very well constructed and only became more comfortable with age. One day after he left work, I took one of his insoles out of his work shoes and traced the shape onto a piece of paper. I then cut out a large number of insole-shaped pieces of paper. From that point on, whenever he left work, I'd grab a couple of paper insoles, draw offensive cartoons on them, date them, and place them underneath each of his actual insoles. Most of the cartoons involved at least one male reproductive organ. Gradually, his shoes became tighter and tighter. He actually complained about it to me and various other co-workers, and talked about having to buy a new pair. Approximately 5 weeks later, a very loud, "What the frick?" could be heard from the back rooms. Everyone walked back to see what the commotion was all about. There he was, paging through each individual insole in total offended disbelief that someone had been messing with him so consistently for such a long time. To this day, it was the most satisfying work prank I've had the pleasure of conducting. During a major presentation, an odd noise started coming in from the speakers. It seemed like one of the people who called in left his mic on. At first I thought he was shifting his chair, but as the noises became more rhythmic and frequent and louder, it was clear the dude was snoring. There were at least 50 people in attendance for this presentation who got to listen to this. I worked at a large chain retailer as a front-of-store supervisor. One day, one of my cashiers clocks in, comes to me and says, "So, my last day was last week, but I'm still on the schedule." Sure enough, there she was. "Shoot, well, did you give out your 2 weeks? It's slow. Go to HR and figure this out." "No, I mean, I was let go last week. I was fired, but they scheduled me." Okay. Do you still want to talk to HR?" As long as I'm getting paid. I like this job. I'll just have fun today. What are they going to do, fire me?" That was the day I found out the true limits of the point-of-sales staff discount button. A guy being called into HR because he continually had his pants around his ankles at the urinal. Everyone would talk about it for weeks, and then finally, someone reported it. I was a legal intern this summer for a mid-size city. My desk was situated in front of a bulletin board with job postings for the city, and when a posting needed to go up, I'd put it up since it was closest to my desk. One day, the office manager gives me one to hang up, and I do so. A few hours later, she approaches me with another posting and says it's the same one, but there's an error on the old one, so hang the new one up. She goes back to her desk with the old one and goes, "Oh my God." She comes back over to point out that in the requirements for the job section, someone put, "Must be able to handle snarky comments from strangers who don't know you at all, but enter the lobby with an attitude just because you represent government." So she shows my boss this, who was the city lawyer, and she has a fit. She called HR, and the head of HR came down to our office and they held a meeting about it. So I've spent a ton of time at this job goofing around, and by this point I know the city website pretty well. I know the city also posted job openings online, which the public can see. So I went to the city's job page, and sure enough, the posting was there, comment and all. At this point, I'm dying because I think it's funny. So I go into my boss's office and let them know it's on the city website. The HR boss freaks out and tells me to call IT and have them get rid of it. It was a fun day. I'm a Starbucks barista, and I was on the drive-thru for our usual after-school rush. So my shift supervisor was in charge of getting all the food orders together at the time, and someone at the window ordered a cookie. Me, trying to get the line moving and not bothering to make sure, took the pastry bag she handed me with the cookie sticker on it and gave it out to the lady at the window, and she drove off. 5 minutes later, the same lady pulls up to the speaker and says, "Hey, I just came through and ordered a chocolate chip cookie, but I got a bag with 2 strips of bacon in it." For clarification, we don't even serve straight-up bacon. My shift supervisor had taken some bacon from one of the sandwiches and warmed it up for herself, and then switched it with a cookie somehow. What other great mysteries have finally been solved? In 1981, a Soviet submarine ran aground in Swedish waters. This was a huge deal, although the Soviets claimed the sub was in distress and didn't purposefully enter Swedish waters. Basically, everyone in Sweden saw it as evidence that their waters were being invaded by spy subs. Plus, they did some snooping of their own and determined that the sub was emitting radiation, meaning it had nukes on board. So they went along with the Soviets' clearly false claim about accident and helped get the sub out of there, but panic was in the air. So the Swedes did exactly what you'd expect, and they prepared for more Soviet subs. I mean, when you see one Soviet sub, surely there are more, right? So Sweden developed advanced acoustic technology to detect subs, and they created a plan to basically seal off the waters when they heard a sub. And wouldn't you know it, a year later, they found a Soviet sub. Well, they didn't find it, but they absolutely heard it, and they cut off the bay and figured they just had to hunt the sub down. But after a month, they couldn't. They gave up and reopened the bay, but they assumed the sub found a way out. But they'll get it next time. And then it happened again. But they couldn't find it again. And then again and again, with no clear pattern for a decade. What the heck? Thankfully, the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed. So, no more subs, right? Niet. Because the Russian subs are still coming. Wait, what? Okay, so now nothing is making sense. At this point, the Swedish military brought in outside experts to figure out what was happening. This included oceanographer types, who were obvious experts in the surrounding waters. The military then played the audio evidence of the Soviet submarines, only to be told they weren't submarines at all. They were fish, and the propeller-like sound was water being released from their swim bladders. And that is the story of how the Swedish military spent 10 years and tens of millions of dollars chasing gassy, tooting fish. This is a personal family mystery that got solved a few years ago, so nothing that would have gotten media attention. But my maternal great-grandmother once ran away from home to the big city, and came back pregnante. She refused to disclose anything about the father. Either way, even down to my generation, we've had unusually shaped feet. Rather flat with a strange angle, and it's made most regular shoes uncomfortable. It's not so bad for me, I take physically more after my paternal side of the family, but my brother and mother have it real bad. So does my cousin, who ended up seeking the help of a physical therapist. The therapist said that her feet are truly unusually shaped, and referred her to a specialist doctor who's an expert on feet. Apparently that's a thing. The doctor examined her feet and said that the only place in the world with distinct feet like this is a certain county in France with winemakers who've been stomping on grapes for centuries. He said that he's 99% certain that the feet come from there, that we must have close family lineage from that place. My cousin told our family and we were very confused. We most certainly don't have French relatives, until we realized great-grandma. The city she ran away to was known to house traveling craftsmen from all over the world. She must have hooked up with a French winemaker. We joke now that she had rolled over in her grave because this strange foot doctor had discovered her great secret. How many generations of vintners do you have to have in one place for people to develop special grape-stomping feet? That's fascinating. I thought physical characteristics like this took thousands of years to develop into a norm. Did these people all just stay put in one place? Did no one migrate? That's a very stable community right there. Thanks for sharing. 3 Secrets of Fatima, a series of apocalyptic visions and prophecies which were purportedly given to 3 young Portuguese shepherds on 13th of May 1917. The first 2 secrets were revealed, but the third was considered too shocking and dangerous by the Vatican to ever be made public. Until it was released, after all, and it was, well, a bit of a letdown. Lyle Stevick. I'm surprised he hasn't been mentioned here already. He was a John Doe case of a man who decided he didn't want to be alive anymore and acted on that in a motel in Amanda Park, Washington in September 2001. He signed into the hotel under the name Lyle Stevick, which wasn't his real name, and he was found dead in his room, suspended in the closet, with money left for the room and a note that just said he was self-deleting. No identifiable information was found on him. Police investigations at the time did not produce any results. He was only identified in 2018 via DNA analysis, but his family chose not to reveal his true identity. The true identity of Benjamin Kyle, the guy who had amnesia after being found unconscious in a Burger King dumpster. Genetic research discovered his name was William Burgess Powell. His story is still pretty crazy, as it was discovered that at some point in his life he had abandoned his family and all of his possessions to live on his own. And there are still no official records of him for the 20 years prior to him being discovered in the dumpster. Mary Toft. I mean, really, what the frick? Basically, this woman starts giving birth to copious amounts of rabbit parts. Woman taken to London and studied under intense supervision, and it turns out she was shoving the pieces up there days before the publicity. Human spontaneous combustion. It's not really a thing. It's actually where there was an overlooked source of ignition, then subcutaneous fat is absorbed into clothing and acts like a wick. Basically, they're a human candle. The Pioneer Gravity Anomaly. The space probe wasn't accelerating away from Earth the way we had predicted, but it didn't get noticed until the probe was way the frick out there. The next space probe got launched, gets way out there, and the same thing happens. What the frick? How does acceleration not work right? Does gravity just change really far away? Turns out the heat from the radioisotope thermoelectric generator was all coming off the same side of the space probe, and the extra particle radiation gave a thermal recoil force, resulting in an extra acceleration of, and I'm not making this number up, about an 80 billionth of a meter per second squared. Over enough distance, apparently, it all counts. Bermuda Triangle, or the Devil's Sea, a triangle-shaped section of ocean where airplanes and boats were known to disappear. Apparently, most stories were embellished, and there is so much traffic that goes through the area, it's actually a very small amount of vessels that go missing, percentage-wise. I can't help but feel like bringing up some of these is contributing to making the world seem a little less of a magical and incredible place, even though it absolutely is. As a kid, I used to dream of flying over the Bermuda Triangle and seeing what happened. Oh well. The Prophet Hen of Leeds. A hen was laying eggs with messages like "Christ is coming," and people thought the world was ending. Turned out the farmer was actually writing on the eggs herself and then reinserting them back into the chicken. The tomb of Jesus's previously unknown brother turned out to be a hoax to try and sell the tomb to a nobody for a lot of money. The French guy who claimed to be a missing boy in the 90s, he even lived with the crazy mother. Nicholas Barclay, aged around 13 at the time he went missing, was last seen playing basketball with his friends in his hometown of San Antonio, Texas, on the 13th of June, 1994. Barclay never made it home and has not been seen or heard from since. In 1997, Bourdain took Barclay's identity and was flown to the United States. Although Bourdain had brown eyes and a French accent, he convinced the family he was their blue-eyed son, saying that he had escaped from a child trafficking ring and the ring had altered his eye color. Bourdain lived with the family for almost 5 months until 6th of March 1998. The craziest part is they recently found out the brother was the murderer and murdered Barclay with permission of his mother. And the only reason the French guy got away with it is because the family didn't want to reveal that they knew who killed Barclay. Kids like Cinnamon Toast Crunch because there's a bunch of sugar on it, not because of the cinnamon or the crunch. My parents wouldn't let me buy Fruit Loops because it was unhealthy. Instead, they got me Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Still baffles me to this day, and I'm a father now. Rex McElroy. Over a good few years, he was an absolute piece of crap. Lived in Skidmore, Missouri. Groomer, unspeakable act offender, married this 14-year-old girl who he gave Stockholm Syndrome to avoid the unspeakable act charges, piece of crap lawyer to get him out of a literal attempted murder, attacks with a deadly weapon. It was also well known that he stole cattle or something like that, but because of the crappy law system, they couldn't do anything about it without direct proof. Oh, did I forget to mention he had kids with this 14-year-old wife? One of his crappy kids tried to steal some candy from a store in the 1980s. The store owner, who was 70, caught the kid, so Rex started stalking the family who owned the store, coming to their house and just standing in front, making threats and everything. In a confrontation, he tried to blow the owner's head off, but Ernest Bauernkamp, the owner, dodged and had his neck grazed, and he was quite hurt but alive. Finally, Rex was caught for this and found guilty of attempted murder, but bailed because he was rich. People would literally leave whenever he entered a bar. He bullied a sheriff into stepping down from his job and was constantly loaded with money, buying new trucks all the time. Well, eventually people got tired of his crap. Dozens of people followed him into the bar. McElroy finished his drink, went back out. As he started the car, an unknown amount of people opened fire on this absolute crock of crap, absolutely destroying him. As a matter of fact, they wanted him dead so bad that they found revolver casings on the ground, meaning someone had enough time to reload an entire revolver. There were numerous shooters, and the Stockholmed wife called out one shooter, but every other person there, of around 50 people, said they saw nothing, and hell, some even said that they heard nothing. So yeah, the guy was dead after near a damn decade of ruining this little town. Investigations were concluded, with nobody charged, no proper testification, and nobody sentenced. But we all know it was the townsfolk, and McElroy deserved it. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Roman concrete that resisted seawater, and the missing Roanoke colony. The lost recipe for the concrete turned out to be something we misinterpreted, and the Roanoke colony was abandoned because the settlers decided to live and mix with the natives. DNA tracing was actually able to connect this. Turns out the settlers just went to live with the natives and everyone knew it. People just refused to believe that white settlers needed help from Indians. Chupacabra has been pretty much explained by a guy who investigated it for 5 years and wrote a book called Tracking the Chupacabra. Long story short, the initial witnesses thought the movie Species was a documentary. Most subsequent sightings and bodies were wild animals that looked weird because they had mange. Molyneux's problem. If a man born blind can feel the difference between shapes such as spheres and cubes, could he, if given the ability to see, distinguish those objects by sight alone, in reference to the tactile schemata he already possessed? The answer is no. Well, the person who wrote that submission has been a little glib in their answer, but I do understand that we probably obtained the answer because we now have some limited capacity to give sight to those born blind, so that's cool. The Marfa Mystery Lights. Small town in West Texas has lights that can be seen dancing off the horizon in a certain spot some nights. For many years, the source of the light was not known, and explanations ranged from a mass hysteria to the ever-popular UFO. One researcher finally figured it out. The elevation changes and desert air would occasionally combine to distort and project headlights from cars on a highway several miles away. Reports of the mystery lights from the times prior to the highways or automobiles are probably campfires in the general area of the highway. Like many highways, the area was already used as a road for quite a while. How the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids. A French architect figured it out. They used an internal ramp system. Some of the turn stations for the ramps are still there. Really quite brilliant. The solution does not disappoint. The Kensington Rock. Found by an American farmer in like the late 1800s. Maybe? Covered in Old Norse runes which were claimed to be from around the year 1360, which would prove that there were white settlers in America long before Columbus, thereby justifying a lot of the purveyors of racist alternate history in the 20th century. The rock was later proved to have been forged by a Swedish settler just for fun some 100 years prior to its discovery, and people are still making documentaries about it, claiming it to be some wild, unrevealed truth of America's colonization. The identity of the Watergate whistleblower that eventually led to Nixon resigning. His identity was secret for 31 years, until 2005 when he was identified as Mark Felt, an FBI AD who had come down with dementia when it was revealed, and not by him. The Boogeyman. Albert Fish was an American serial killer who was also called the Boogeyman, and is thought to have popularized the term. This is the man your parents warned you about at night. He was an unspeakable act offender, cannibal, and murderer. While he committed several disgusting, awful, and depraved acts, the one that got him caught was the murder of a young woman named Grace Budd. He responded to an ad for work her brother put in the paper, but when he met the family, he changed his mind from killing him to killing Grace. After he killed and ate her, he wrote a letter to Grace's mother, explaining in detail what he did to her daughter. This letter was thankfully his undoing, as it provided the key to his capture. The police were able to trace it back to its source and arrest him. This letter has been made public, and if you're interested, you can read the full thing by searching. I can't even imagine being a mother and reading it. I'm so glad they caught him and he was taken off the streets. Who knows how many more people he would have killed. I've become skeptical when police solve a serial killing. They're often under a lot of pressure to find the killer. They sometimes blame a bunch of killings on one guy. There was a guy in Texas that confessed to the murder of a girl he had been dating. She was wearing red undies, and the cops started calling it the Red Panty Killer. He confessed, and then they asked him if he had killed anyone else, and he said, lots. Word got around, and the sheriff and Texas Rangers would tell the other guys to bring the case file, strawberry milkshake, and a pack of Lucky Cigs, and the guy would talk. He confessed to a lot of killings. Someone got curious and did a map of all the killings and when they happened. Turns out it was physically impossible for him to have been in all of those places at the time of the killings. The sheriff and rangers had a simple trick. They'd give the guy the milkshake and cigs and tell the investigators from other states to give him a bit of time and then interview him. But they'd leave the case file in a room with him all alone and he'd read the case file. They'd come in and ask questions and, miraculously, he'd know all about them. Case solved. In the end, it turned out his DNA was not on the panties of this person he'd confessed to killing, but some other guy's DNA was. But the sheriff, cops, and rangers consider all the cases to be closed to this day. The Romanovs. On 20th of July 1918, Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children were executed by the Bolsheviks in the basement of a house on Ekaterinburg. No one knew where they were buried, and over the years, various people came forward claiming they were Princess Anastasia or Tsarevich Nicholas, and that they'd survived the execution. In 1979, the family's remains were located, but they only found 5 bodies. Had 2 of the children managed to survive after all? No. In July 2007, the remains of the other 2 children were found by an amateur archaeologist not far from the first burial site. Fun fact, the late Duke of Edinburgh assisted in the identification through DNA, as both he and the Romanov children were descended from the same daughter of Queen Victoria. And every fan of the animated film Anastasia wept at the news. The narrator apologizes deeply and sincerely at the revelation of the fate of a more than 100-year deceased individual and will not be paying for therapy of distraught viewers. Sarah Yarborough was from a few doors down, who watched over us on several occasions when we were young kids. She was killed and dumped in a bush at the high school like a piece of trash, and it was absolutely devastating. It wasn't a small town, but when it happens to your neighbor, it's very much in your sphere of awareness. Everyone was scared. I remember the media circus at the home and the eventual tapering off of said circus, and the family moving away to get away from the undoubtedly bad memories and constant reminders that their kid was murdered and the killer was out there and still on the loose. It turned into a cold case. Every now and then, I looked for news of an update, even though I grew up and moved away. I did this for years, decades even, because it always bothered me as an early childhood memory. A couple of years ago, I finally saw a local news report that DNA evidence and genealogy databases led to the arrest of the murderer. For me, that was an emotional moment of getting closure, and I can't imagine the magnitude of emotions and fresh wounds felt by the parents having learned that nearly 30 years later, the investigation on the cold case paid off. Amelia Earhart. She crashed. They found her remains. Does ghost hunting work? Nope. 12 or so seasons of it on TV and not a single ghost found. The Weeping Jesus statue in India mystery. Apparently a Jesus statue started crying and all Christians, along with some Hindus, started to drink the tears. It turned out to be sewage. It's hilarious until you read that the guy who discovered it had to flee to Finland due to hate letters. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon have long been a mystery since no archaeological evidence was ever found for any such garden in Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar, who many associate with the gardens, was not known to have enacted any major works of engineering, which would have been necessary to water the gardens. Many have suspected that they may never have existed at all. A popular modern theory is that the gardens weren't Babylonian, but actually Assyrian. The Assyrian king Sennacherib was well known for his waterworks and aqueducts, and his palace in Nineveh was documented to have lavish gardens. It's believed that people mistakenly attributed the gardens to Babylon. The name Babylon means Gate of the Gods, and was used to describe several cities in Mesopotamia. Nineveh's gates was named after different gods by Sennacherib, so it would have been likely to have been referenced that way. Archaeology at the site of Nineveh has been difficult in recent years because it's very close to Mosul, in Iraq. The region had been occupied by Islamic fundamentalists who intentionally damaged parts of the site. What's the wildest wrong number call that you've ever received? I got a call and I didn't recognize the number, so I ignored it 3 or 4 times until I eventually gave in. I picked up the phone and before I could say anything, a guy with a Brooklyn accent starts talking in panic and he said, "Hey yo, that guy we saw was one of Polish Tom's boys. If he shows up, don't say crap about last night." And I said, "Sorry, this must be the wrong number." He just started cursing and hung up. Ever since then, I've been curious as to who the heck this Polish Tom is. I used to get calls for Phoebe right after I got my new number. A lot of calls. I was always nice and let them know that they had the wrong number. This went on for 2 years. Near the end, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Phoebe. She said she wanted to apologize and thanked me for being kind. And she thinks she told everyone the new number, but if anyone calls, could I give it to them? I said, sure, no problem. I still occasionally get calls. I politely inform them of the new number. One guy was surprised and started texting me about the whole situation. We became friends only over text, and we still text occasionally to this day. A guy called from prison. After I told him wrong number, he said he had nobody to talk to and he had just dialed a random number. I was young and naive, but the guy never asked for anything. We talked for a while, him telling me how he got to be in jail. Straight up street thug, but he was trying to make good and get back to society in good shape. Never talked again. I hope he made it out okay. I was repeatedly getting an international number, and when I picked up, the only thing that it said was, hello? And then it doesn't hang up, and it's very clearly a recording of the hello and then just faint static. Super creepy. Also, one time I had a wrong number call from the area code I lived in, and when I told the guy that I wasn't Greg, he didn't seem to mind and asked me if I party. I said no, so he reiterated and asked if I did substances. I think it was a substance dealer cold call. Got a voicemail on the house phone a few years ago. It was from an older-sounding guy with what sounded like the worst case of laryngitis I've ever heard. All he said was, "Linda, call me on this number. It's in your interest." I have no idea who Linda is or why she should call, but everyone in the family assumes she's dead by now. Rip Linda. Listeners, if you know a Linda, check she's alright and whether she has answered any cryptic calls from men who sound like they're dying. When I picked up, someone immediately went off in a frantic worry about his dog who'd run away, now gone for a week. When he continued how he'd looked everywhere, I stopped him to mention he had the wrong number. But out of kindness, we talked a little bit. Losing a pet is horrible. I know that, and I got to know the part of town where the dog was missing. Many miles away, and he mentioned some details about his dog. Well, I'll be damned, when I go to the market later that day, I see a dog begging that meets the description. Now, in my mind, this is utterly impossible. Period. Nevertheless, I look up the recent call in my phone history and I FaceTime the guy. It's his dog. They were reunited 2 hours later. He had initially thought he was calling the local website for when your pet has gone missing. He had already notified them and provided a picture. Because he was getting desperate, he thought he had called the mobile of the volunteer to have the information added that the dog was usually wearing a scarf with the bright neon colors of a local band. The dog wasn't wearing that in the picture, so he tells me this, and it's actually how I recognized the dog. I once got called because a substance dealer had been shot by the cops, and they were calling the numbers on his phone to help identify him. I asked them who died, but they said they got the number wrong when they called me, so they apologized and hung up. I work at an old folks' home and was in the elevator one day, and the emergency phone started ringing. I pushed the button to answer it, and it was some guy looking for a chiropractor's office. He was super confused when I told him he had called an elevator in an assisted living community. I was confused because who knew you could call an elevator from an outside line? Back in the olden days, a coworker of mine got sick while visiting his parents for the weekend. This was when long-distance calls cost money, so his mother offered to call his boss on Monday morning using her office phone. A man answered and she told him that Billy wouldn't be able to come into work that day. The man sounded rather surprised, but politely said that he'd transfer her to his secretary. The secretary enlightened Mum that she had called the private number of the governor of the state, and he had personally answered. Some weird guy handling affairs at some California courthouse screaming at me saying I was supposed to show up to court. The man left like 12 mails once and I had no clue, each one escalating in anger. Really weird guy. Needs to chill out at his job. I got one of those calls on the voicemail at my job once. The court or the lawyer calling and saying that the person was going to get arrested if they didn't show up. I felt like being a decent person, so I called them back and was like, don't arrest them, they clearly didn't get the message. Well, mine was a text message. The guy was off by 1 digit and was texting saying that he'd give me a down-under kiss at an Albertsons, which is a West Coast grocery store chain, in the parking lot for painkillers. No, I did not take the down-under kiss because I know you people are thinking that. I didn't have any painkillers to give him. My best friend's older sister saved a voicemail for years until she got a new phone. This little boy, who sounded maybe 5 or 6, was apparently calling his girlfriend to break up with her and said he was mad at her and he was going to call her the J word and the R word and the M word. He went through a solid 75% of the alphabet and then ended with, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow at school. Bye. Love you. Bye." It was fantastic. I noticed I missed a call from an unknown number, and the area code was for a town out of state that my daughter happened to be attending an EDM music festival at. Of course, the mum in me panicked and called it back, but I got the answering message. I left a message saying what my first name was and that I had a daughter currently in that town, and if the call was from or about her, I could be reached at, and I gave them my number, please call me back, etc. About an hour later, I got a call back from a sweet older lady with a thick southern accent telling me, "Sugar, I couldn't let you worry, sweetie. I dialed the wrong number, and I noticed right away and I hung up. But you must have seen it, and here I made you worry for nothing. Your girl's all right. My grandson's a paramedic, and he says ain't no one died up there yet. And only 2 boys got dehydrated so far and passed out. I bet she's having a fun time." We talked for half an hour. Shout out to you, Clara. A few months ago, I got a call from a convenience store in town and they asked for me by last name. I have a super uncommon last name, so I know it was for me. Right after I said it was me, they hung up. I called them back and they said they must have called the wrong number. They literally asked for me by name. After overanalyzing it for a few hours, I thought it was some kind of scam. It's been a few months though, and no sign of anything weird on any accounts or anything as of yet. Someone called my number asking for Gary. I'm not Gary, and that isn't even close to my name. I politely said, "Sorry, you have the wrong number." They stated back that no they didn't, and I was a C-word and they were going to kill me. It was at this point that I decided, screw this guy. So I said back some things like, "Come over and do it, and I'll mess you up so bad you'll be peeing blood," or something like that, and this guy got more angry and said some other crap. Then I just went again, "No, seriously dude, you have the wrong number," and I hung up. Not a call, but I thought it would be worth sharing. I got a text from a wrong number once about 10 years ago, and it said, "Hey girl, you still dance? I need to make some money quick." This is funny enough by itself, but particularly amusing because I'm a man, and freaking hilarious because I also happen to be paraplegic. The narrator would like to note that our commenter didn't write whether or not they accepted the offer. So I choose to believe that a hard-up adult club owner awaited his star dancer and was somewhat baffled when a burly gentleman in undies and a wheelchair rolled out onto the stage and started rotating to the music. Well, I didn't answer mine, but I listened to a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was a guy claiming he knew where I lived and he thinks I'm very beautiful and would love to take me out sometime. He ended the message with, "If you don't respond, I'll kill your dog." I was kind of freaked out, so I texted, "Sorry, you have the wrong number." I knew because I didn't have a dog. He responded with an apology and said it was just a joke he was playing on his girlfriend at the time. I really hope that this was true and they just liked to play creepy jokes on each other. I got this call at my work. I answered, "Name of my company, this is Tom. How can I help you?" There was a man who sounded like he was in a lot of pain on the other end. "Jimmy, this is your cousin Al." I'm sorry, sir, this is Tom, and there's no Jimmy here." "Jimmy, it's your cousin, Al." I'm sorry, there's no Jimmy here." Jimmy, it's your cousin Al. I'm alive." "Sir, is everything okay?"
"Who is this?"
"Al, this is Tom. You called my business. But real quick, are you okay?"
Oh, sorry, I was hit by a truck."
"What, you mean like in the last 10 minutes?"
No, cousin, like 2 weeks ago. I was out with cousin Jimmy and I got hit by a truck walking home. When I came to, cousin Jimmy was gone and I had to call 911.
"Jesus Christ, Al, I'm glad you're okay."
"Oh, Tom, don't take Jesus' name in vain like that. He kept me alive when that truck hit me."
"Oh, my apologies, Al. I'm just glad you're okay."
"Oh, it's okay, Tom. I just wanted to call cousin Jimmy to let him know I'm okay."
"I'm sorry, Al. What's this Al business? We're cousins." "I'm sorry, cousin Al, but cousin Jimmy sounds like a piece of crap."
"Yeah, he kind of is. Well, I have to get going. Mighty good of you to talk to me."
"No problem, cousin Al. I wish you a speedy recovery."
"That's mighty kind of you. You take care now."
He hung up after that. He hasn't called back, but I think about my new family member every day. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I went to school in Chico, California, I lived in a dorm with a payphone in the common room. One night, 4 or 5 of us were sitting around watching TV, and one guy, we'll call him Marvin, was expecting a call from his brother. We'll call him Floyd, who's in school in Nevada. The phone rang and Marvin answers, "Hey Floyd, how you doing?" The answer was, "I'm great. Let me talk to Marvin." "Hahaha, this is Marvin. Now let me talk to Floyd." "Dude, I am Floyd. Put my brother Marvin on now, okay?" "Wait, is this Floyd in Nevada?" "Nah man, this is Floyd in Utah." Eventually, they worked out that the 2 Floyds were trying to call their 2 brothers Marvin on the same night. They worked out that the phone number Floyd called was 1 digit off, and all 4 were in college. There was much amazement and a little hilarity when Marvin finally hung up and told us what had happened. I once got an international American phone call, and as I neither recognized the number nor could I quickly pull up an ID on it, I picked it up and this guy instantly started blathering on in Russian with a thick Russian accent and with a speed that I assumed that only a native speaker could talk at. After a few minutes, I managed to get his attention and go, "Oi, who's this?" And there was this awkward silence, and then suddenly the speaker switches to this American, Texanish accent with impeccable English and profusely apologizes before hanging up. This was a while ago, and I've switched phones and since lost the call history, but now and again I wonder just what did I intercept. I made one wrong number call that stayed with me. My elderly mum passed away, and the nursing home rang me in the early hours of the morning, about 3 a.m. to let me know. It wasn't unexpected, but it was still a shock when it happened. So I tried to ring my brother to let him know, and I must have dialed the wrong number. A young man answered, and I'd obviously woken him from a deep sleep. I realized immediately that he wasn't my brother and apologized. He asked who I was, and I said, "I was trying to ring my brother as our mum has passed away," and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss. I know that probably doesn't seem like a big deal, but I just thought what a nice young man he must be to remember his manners and offer sympathy even when woken from a deep sleep by a random wrong number." It stayed with me. A lady called me one day and said, "Hello, it's your mother," the same way my mum always says it. So we chatted for 10 minutes, and for once she seems to be really listening to me, acknowledging what I'm saying, very sympathetic and concerned in her short replies. So I start to spill my guts about how it's been so hard for me lately, and I'm really just keeping it together for the kids, but all I really want to do is run away or die trying. The concern pours out of her, telling me that I should go see a therapist she knows, and how I've been stronger than this in the past, and she's spot on about everything. Then she says, "Have you told Terry?" Terry who?" I reply. "Your wife, Terry, my daughter." "I'm not married to Terry, I'm talking about Tara." Is this Bob?" "No, this is Paul." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I have the wrong number, but you hang in there and it will all work out. Goodbye." And she hung up. I would really like my mum to actually listen like that woman did one day. Several years ago, I got a text message from an unfamiliar number that said something like, "This one's good too," and included a JPEG of Hello Kitty in a clan robe standing in front of a burning cross. Somehow, someone down in the States, I'm Canadian, had wired up a buzzer at an apartment wrong, such that when someone tried to buzz in, our home phone would ring. For weeks, late at night, drunk people would call asking to get into the apartment. We weren't sure what to make of it. Finally, a sober guy tried to buzz in and we were able to figure it out. Better still, we found out we were able to buzz people into this random apartment by pressing 9 on our end. The problem sorted itself out pretty quickly after we just started hitting 9 every time the phone rang. I mean, there's a non-zero chance that you let a home invader into your apartment block, but you do you. Honestly, if people were waking me up at all hours of the night to be let in, I'd probably get pretty blasé about other people's safety as well. I picked up the phone and heard in Chilean Spanish, "Hello, good afternoon. Could you please contact me with Mr. and gave a name. Please tell him I'm also still interested in the baby goats he offered me the other day." I said in broken Spanish, wrong number? Oh shit, and he hung up. I used to get calls in my college dorm room from people speaking what I think was Korean, maybe Vietnamese, I'm not sure. They were clearly trying to contact a student there, maybe the person who had my room before, and the family still had the phone number, but they sounded very distressed and were asking for somebody's name. But they didn't speak any English at all, and I couldn't talk to them either, so I couldn't even help a little bit. The calls eventually stopped after a couple of weeks. I hope they got in contact with whoever they were trying to reach. Back in the days of dial-up, when I was about 16, I was secretly surfing on naughty adult websites in the computer room while the rest of the family was in the living room watching television. Suddenly, my connection was gone and immediately the phone starts ringing. Since one of the phones, the landline, was close to the computer, I pick up. A voice with a foreign accent says, "You called the wrong number," even if I didn't call anyone. Nonplussed, I reconnected to the internet. 15 minutes later, the cops appeared at our doorstep in full body armor with flashlights, telling my shocked mum that they received an emergency call from our house and wanted to check if there was a domestic disturbance. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. I had my old phone number for more than a decade, so I was getting robocalls galore. When my boyfriend and I decided to take the plunge and get a phone plan together, I was thrilled to get a new phone number. What I didn't realize is that some idiot named Tony had my number before me. He had either died or was too lazy to tell everyone that he'd changed his number. I'm guessing the latter. It's been over 6 months, and I still get work-related and personal calls and texts for this Tony idiot. I used to call them back and leave voicemails explaining that this was no longer Tony's number, and they needed to tell him to tell people that he had changed his number. One person texted me and demanded, "Who is this?" I guess they thought I stole his phone or something. Frick you, Tony. Let me enjoy my new number in peace. So this old lady had her phone on divert to my number. The phone company couldn't do anything about it because she had had it diverted to my number on her phone, and I can only assume it was 1 digit out. First, a family member was in the hospital dying and had been brought in by an ambulance and wasn't long for this world, so other family members called and left a message that they saw her car in the car park and to come to this area as the person might not live long, and because it went to me, she didn't get the message. Second, her friends had a fantastic ski trip and went into details of where they went and what they did and with whom, and they wanted to catch up with her soon. She didn't get that message either. Third, the hospital rang to say that she had an appointment in a department on a given date of the week. Luckily, they left their number, so I rang back and explained the situation and admonished them for leaving personal details on a random message minder. 4, some kids singing happy birthday to her. 5, a completely unintelligible accented message to the lady about a get-together. I understood maybe 1 word out of 5. 6, noticed that a Pilates class was postponed or the location changed. I can't quite remember. 7, finally a nephew who left his number for a callback, so I did and explained the whole list of messages and how the phone company couldn't help and could he please change the diversion on her phone. He must have, because I didn't get any more, although I systematically blocked all numbers that called for her. After moving provinces and changing my cell number, for the next 3 years I received calls from collection agents looking for a Jason Williams. At least once a month I received a call. After the first year, I began telling them that this was no longer his number and I've recorded the name of their business and any further contact will result in harassment charges. 39 different collection agencies called looking for him since I started taking notes. 39. I still, to this day, have no idea who Jason is or what the frick he was doing, but I haven't received a call for him for 2 years now. This was in the 90s, long before cell phones were common. At college, my brother and I were both students, roommates at an off-campus apartment. I was graduating, waiting in the lobby of the University Job Placement Center for an appointment with a counselor. There was a landline phone on my desk, normally used by students to call job reps. It wasn't really meant to get incoming calls. And then it rang. I looked up at the receptionist, who motioned for me to answer it, as I was the only other person present and was within arm's reach of it. It was my brother's major professor trying to get a hold of him. I told him where my brother was, he was out running errands, and suggested when he could call the apartment to get a hold of him. He thanked me. I asked him how he knew to call the job center. He hadn't. He had meant to call the apartment, and when I'd picked up, he'd assumed that that was what he had done. He didn't know he had misdialed until I told him, and I had to hand the phone to the receptionist before he believed me. So, calling the correct number wouldn't have worked, nobody was home. my brother wasn't reachable by phone at the time. I was the only person near a phone who knew his schedule. His professor dialed a wrong number and accidentally got a phone that I happened to be standing next to. Not really strange, but annoying. I used to get calls from some guy, usually around 2 to 3 a.m., looking for someone named Dave. I'd usually be asleep when he called, but he always left a voicemail for Dave, just your typical, "Hey, it's Jeff, call me back," kind of thing. This went on for weeks. I never called them back. I thought they'd get the hint or at least see this Dave guy in person by that point and figure out their mistake, but no. One afternoon, I got another voicemail looking for Dave, so I called him back. The guy picked up and I explained the number he had just called and left a voicemail to was mine and he's been calling the wrong number for a month. He completely denied calling me and said he hadn't called anyone that day and he's never called my number. At this point, I was annoyed. I know it's him. I've been listening to his voicemails for weeks. I basically just said, "I know it's you, stop calling me." And he acted like I was crazy. He did stop calling after that, though. Lawyers. What did you have to explain to a complete idiot you were defending? No, you dingus. Self-defense does not mean that he punches you in the face and then 2 weeks later you go to his house, ring his doorbell and kick the crap out of him. By far and away the strangest thing I've ever had to explain to a client is how to use an elevator. Our courtroom was on the 4th floor, and she needed to take an elevator to get there. I had to describe how you get in, push the 4 button, and then get out when the lights above show she's on floor 4. Yep. The dumbest legal thing I've had to explain is that you can't terminate your parental rights voluntarily and then request visitation with that child. I once had a client who wanted to declare bankruptcy. I explained that he needed to have his tax returns over the past few years filed in order to do so. He said he hadn't filed taxes in 20 years because it ain't none of the government's business how much money I make. I don't understand. People make it sound like the IRS will throw you in a federal penitentiary if you ever dare to not file taxes, but some guy can just not file for 2 decades and have nothing happen to him? Can someone explain to me how that's possible? When I was a legal intern at a criminal defender's law office, we had a client who was charged with murder. We explained to the client not to make any phone calls saying anything incriminating because it will be recorded. Where prisoners can use the phone, there's a giant sign that says, "Phone calls will be recorded." On top of that, before you're able to call out, there's an automated recording that tells you that all calls are being recorded and monitored unless it's to your attorney, which are covered by privilege. A client made a call to his girlfriend that very evening asking her to hide his weapon. I just found out right now what happened to the case. Apparently it was dismissed. The defense attorney was really good. It doesn't matter whether you were sober or not. You jumped out of a 3rd-story window with a beer bottle and threw it at a cop. The jury is going to think you were drunk. Also, I think you were drunk. To be honest, wouldn't proving that they were sober be a much worse thing for this person? I mean, they're in trouble anyway, but surely if someone knows you attacked the police officer while in possession of all your faculties, people have a fairly good indicator that you acted purely vindictively. I had to explain to a client that they had to pay me. This is more common than you'd think. For some reason, some people think lawyers are like their personal spiritual guides or fairy godmother. That you really can go to jail if we lose at trial. Mine's from this week. My client said, "So, I don't smoke crystal, I just think it's from doing the deed unprotected." I answered, "So you'd like me to explain to the judge, it's okay, you just bang crystal heads." "Yeah." Not a client per se, but a victim. Had to explain what the correct medical term for the word splooge meant. The defense attorney asked if the defendant splooged, and she said no. On redirect, I explained that the word meant something came out of his private parts, and she said, "Oh, then yes." Not the brightest person I've ever met. That your boss sending you a substance test after he walked in on you snorting white snow off your desk does not qualify as entrapment. You can't sue him. Don't signal to the judge that you need to use the restroom during your trial by making eye contact and vigorously nodding while urgently pointing at your crotch. You should tell your lawyer and let her take care of it. You should definitely not make a break for the door. I went on a date with a lawyer recently who had told me he had to be at work at 9 a.m. the next day to explain to someone that he could, in fact, be fired for killing someone with the company vehicle. I was contacted by a couple who had paid for a trip to see the midnight sun in northern Norway. They wanted to sue the travel agency when they found out it was the same sun that they had back home. I had to explain that there's only a single sun and that they can't sue a travel agency for selling a midnight sun trip. Every year, one of the travel agencies publishes a list of the most ridiculous complaints they've received. They're hilarious. Last year, someone complained that the beach was too sandy. Another good one was that they hadn't told the couple that a lot of the beaches can be, undressed, and the husband became, quote, distracted. I work on appeals, which means that I spend more time with the law than with real people. But the law has some gems, like this one guy who really happened. Document reads, "At the police station, the arresting officer advised defendant, both orally and with a consent form, of his constitutional rights pursuant to Miranda v. Arizona, 384 U.S., bunch of numbers, 1966. Defendant refused to sign the consent form and stated that he would never waive his rights. At the same time, however, he asked the arresting officer whether he could speak to him man to man. At this point, a detective with the task force entered the room with the evidence of the substances gathered from the inventory search of the Corvette and advised the defendant of the charges that would be filed against him. To this, the defendant responded, "You think this is big time? This ain't crap." The detective then asked the defendant whether he was willing to provide them with any information, and the defendant responded that if he were released with his substances in his possession that night, he had called the police occasionally with information on certain persons he felt needed to be off the streets. The detective then started to leave the booking area, and the defendant said, "And I want my stuff back." When the detective asked him whether he was referring to the substances discovered in the Corvette, the defendant responded that he was. File that under, "You should definitely exercise the right to remain silent." I had to tell mine why they shouldn't have called the cops to tell them exactly what they did that violated the restraining order. A lawyer can't out and lie for a client. If you said to them, "Yeah, I burned his frickin' house down and weed on the ashes," then he can't say that you were 2 states away. That blew some of my students' minds. When I was volunteering at teen court in college, I had a kid who burned down a few hundred acres and a half dozen houses. As soon as I went, "Let's talk about how to handle this," he went, "I did it. I was bored and I wanted to see if I could catch the field on fire, and then when it spread, I figured, frick it, they have insurance, and I left without calling the cops." Totally confused when I told the judge I need to be relieved after he started lying his butt off about it in court. In my state, we have this thing called victims' compensation. An oversimplification of how it works goes as follows. If you're the victim of a crime and suffer some form of injury, like a psychological, physical, etc., you can apply for a payment from state funds. If you're the perpetrator of one of those crimes, like an assault, robbery, unwanted advances of a serious nature, an order can be made for you to pay the state back an amount relating to the victim's compensation. I had a client who felt the process of being convicted for attacking his relatives and having to pay victim's compensation back to the state was arduous, and in return, he should be receiving victim's compensation from the state. So, that was fun to explain. By his logic, his victims got compensation and that was unfair. He didn't at all grasp the logic that his victims had been badly injured by his conduct for which he had been convicted. Although I'm sure his victims weren't the nicest people, they hadn't attacked him. I gather he hadn't grasped he'd done anything wrong. I had a client once who was in trouble for stealing sample medications from a hospital. We got security footage from the DA as part of the evidence, and when it came down, we watched it together. The camera was literally 10 feet away in a well-lit room, and we watched her shovel prescription samples into a garbage bag and walk off. After it was done, she turned to me and asked if I thought she was going to be able to get off. I said no. Honestly, the DA was being super nice. She had pulled this trick 2 days in a row and got caught, and they were doing them as 2 separate charges. Combined, it would make it a felony, but instead it was only facing like 2 years in prison. I had a deal worked out to get it down to 6 months. And this lady fired me because she thought she could get off without anything. The DA let me know that no offer would be available to her after that move. I wonder if there's any lawyer alive who'd confidently tell their client that they could get away scot-free when there was video evidence of them committing said crime. Oh, and I mean a regular person, not one of the super rich. They get away with this crap all the time. Not to a client, but other party. I was acting for a particular manufacturer. They were sued for an injury incurred by someone using a product made by a different manufacturer. I rang their lawyer and said I was acting for them, but I didn't understand why they'd been named as a defendant in the suit, but the body of the claim said the plaintiff had been injured by a product made by manufacturer B. I asked if it was a monster typo or what. The response was that they thought that manufacturer A was the manufacturer of the products sold under the name of manufacturer B. Now, that isn't inherently stupid, I guess, so I said they had no basis in fact whatsoever, and that A and B were unrelated competitors. And I asked, as a matter of curiosity, how they'd reached the conclusion that A were the manufacturer of B. The response was along the lines of, someone in the office, I think it was maybe Jim, one of our clerks, who thought he'd read somewhere that B was made by A. That was it. No checking of the product paperwork, no company searches, no brand name register searches, no inquiries with our client or B, not even frickin' Google, just some guy in the office had once heard something. And on that basis, they'd issued a very financially sizable product liability suit. I once had to explain to a client that he could in fact fire an employee for 1, stealing significant sums of money from the safe, 2, for pulling a weapon on a coworker who questioned these activities, and 3, waving said piece in a customer's face moments later, all of which were on camera. I processed a case where a woman sued her lawyers after a divorce because they didn't explain to her that divorcing her husband meant she'd no longer be married. I recently had a call from a guy who found out that Long John Silver's was microwaving his baked shrimp combo. He wanted to eat there for every meal for a year and then sue them for false advertising. He changed his mind when I suggested that he'd probably die of a heart attack before reaching his 1-year goal. I watched a Florida Supreme Court appeal over a murder case. The guy killed several people with a baseball bat and wanted his sentence mitigated because he had PTSD. He claimed he had PTSD from experiencing the murder he committed. The court had to explain to him that a mental issue acquired while committing a crime can't mitigate you from the crime you committed. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When a client called me this past Memorial Day and I asked why she was calling me on a holiday, she replied that she didn't think Jews celebrated Memorial Day. I never thought that I'd have to explain that to anyone. To answer some of the questions, yes, I am Jewish. No, I never told her I was Jewish. I have an answering service which took her call and emailed me the message, which was that it was very urgent that she speak to me that day. Given the courts were closed and her case was a paternity and child support matter, I thought it had to be quite the emergency. Turns out it wasn't. She just wanted to ask whether the suspected father was required to take the DNA test ordered by the court. I then had to explain what paternity meant. Not the dumbest, but the one I have the most problem with is attorney-client privilege. It's only a secret and safe from discovery from the other side if you keep it a secret. Don't forward my emails to other people. Don't talk about your case. Keep it a secret. That the presence of the yellow fringe on the flags in the courtroom doesn't mean that the court is an admiralty court without jurisdiction to hear the client's criminal case. Sovereign citizens are something else. I was clerking in a bankruptcy court and we had a case where the petitioners were a group of men that had a mix of ideologies between sovereign citizenship, the redemption movement, and strawman theory. They believed that an individual has 2 personas, one the real flesh and blood human being and the other a separate legal personality or person, usually written in capitals, who is the strawman, and that the strawman is responsible for all their debts, liabilities, taxes, and legal responsibilities belonging to the strawman rather than the physical individual themselves. Also, that when you're born, the government puts $630,000 in an account for this strawman and somehow you can write checks off that account using the UCC? Basically, the petitioners went into a Cadillac dealership and presented these strawman checks and demanded cars. The The dealership called the cops and they were arrested for fraud. Then the petitioners attempted to force the dealership into involuntary bankruptcy so they could get the cars. There were 3 petitioners and they were all pro se, so needless to say the motions were ridiculous and unintelligible. And this was on my second day as a clerk. Sovereign citizens really just are fascinating case studies of human behavior. They heard an argument that sounded interesting, decided that it must be true, and refused to neither hear out the possibility that they were wrong, nor look at the fact that I believe any of their arguments have ever in history carried water in a court of law. It's wild. I had a mediation last week with a client on a really crappy case and managed to settle for a decent amount. I then explained to the plaintiff her share of the settlement after paying the bill. She was confused, so I explained that I was speaking about our fee and expenses. She got really upset because we were taking her money. I had to explain what a contingency contract was and how we were compensated for our services. The conversation took a turn for the absurd when I had to explain I don't work for free. I once had to explain what a maiden name was because they had no idea. Similarly, with a different client, I tried to explain why they needed to fill out the intake questionnaire. I was explaining that I needed information such as their name, address, and date of birth in order to draft paperwork. Their response? "Why do I have to do this? What did I even hire you for? You're useless. If I have to do all this work, I might as well represent myself." They were super angry and stormed out the front door. "Sorry, I don't magically know your date of birth." As for the maiden name, it was a very small country town. This person was most definitely a native English speaker. As for the questionnaire, someone asked why we don't just ask for a driver's license. The questionnaire was about 2 or 3 pages long and also needed other information such as any previous names, social security number, children's names, among other things. Well, from the other side, I once missed a court date and assumed that it had put me in even deeper legal doo-doo, and my lawyer then had to explain to me that dodging his calls to avoid being arrested was just dumb and the exact wrong course of action. If it helps, we get it all the time as lawyers, and the law profession is full of those with anxiety or depression, which are both issues that can make you want to avoid facing stuff. Personally, I totally get why my clients would avoid the crap out of their problems. I hate opening my mail, but I tell my clients on the regular not to avoid theirs. So your attorney didn't necessarily think you were an idiot, he would have just cringed at the hole he knew that you were digging for yourself. A friend of my dad once tried to sue him. Why? Because this friend's dad had died, and since my dad was like a father to his friend, he should just give him money every month just like his dad did when he was alive. Apparently the lawyer just said, "That's not how it works." I have to explain to clients on a daily basis that yes, you do actually have to pay for that house you're buying. If your mortgage company hasn't given us the money yet or you didn't arrange for them to give enough money, then you can't pay for the house and the house is not yours. And no, I can't give you keys to the house before it's yours. I once had to explain to opposing counsel that his entire argument was wrong because he had cited a statute for chattels, not real property. It was a case involving a land contract. I used to be a legal aid lawyer, so sometimes I had sovereign citizens come in for help. I'd have to explain that their magic words wouldn't solve anything and they were going to get evicted. If they wouldn't agree to negotiate for settlement, I wouldn't represent them because they never had any real defenses, and we didn't have the resources to litigate impossible cases. Bankruptcy attorney here. If you know you're coming into my office to file bankruptcy, do not make major financial decisions before you talk to me. For example, cashing out your 401k, paying your family members the money you owe them, or buying a car with no intention of paying off the loan. The court allows you to discharge your debt, and the only thing they ask is for you to be honest and not sneaky about it. You've got to respect the process. I worked in bankruptcy in Canada for many years. There was a company going under, but the director couldn't physically sign until Monday and didn't want the staff to know because half is his family. We allow him to stay open for the weekend with one stipulation: only cash and carry sales because he can't take deposits as he won't be ordering items. It's illegal to take money when you know you won't provide the goods. He instructs his staff, who obey him. On Monday morning, he opens at 8 and takes cash and credit deposits for 3 hours until the trustee shows up with the documents. The tip of the iceberg of the crap show for that file was that he said, "You only said weekends, so I operated as business as usual this morning and took a few $1,000s in orders." I mean, I'm not a smart guy, but as a small business owner, that's the biggest brain moment. The place had to be a certain size to be employing multiple people, and not being able to follow such a simple instruction or realize why trying to trick the system is such a bad idea is just breathtaking. Not the lawyer, I'm the other side of the lawsuit for this piece of work. Obviously, I'm trying not to reveal details, sorry, but it's still going on. So far, we, the judge, his lawyer, I want to say it's been 9 different lawyers now, have had to explain to him the following. The statute of limitations. Lawyers quit if you don't pay them. My lawyer cannot advise him. He has to pay the court fees. Lawyers quit if you don't pay them. If you fire your lawyer when suing as a corporation, you'll be kicked out. Lawyers quit if you don't pay them. Statute of limitations again. My lawyer cannot advise him. That during discovery he handed over emails that had the actual date of a meeting instead of the month earlier that he'd been claiming. Lawyers quit if you don't pay them. Statute of limitations. Yes, the judge can go off the record and berate you for 15 minutes if she thinks it helps the case. My lawyer will laugh in your face for asking for advice about the judge. His lawyer needs his actual address, not just a FedEx store where he picks up his mail periodically. The court isn't going to bother calling each of the 8 different cell numbers that just might be the one you currently have active. Lawyers quit if you don't pay them. My lawyer cannot advise him. The reading of the settlement and agreeing to it on record in court is binding. Simply saying that a person is the attorney doesn't actually make them the attorney, there's actual paperwork. My lawyer cannot advise him. Lawyers quit if you don't pay them. The ruling was against him and he can't sell what was never his. He needs to actually pay the court fees for his appeal. He needs an attorney for the appeal because corporations must be represented by an attorney in court. He needs to file the paperwork required for an appeal. He still needs an attorney for the appeal because corporations still have to be represented by an attorney in court. My lawyer cannot advise him. Yes, Rule 8.140A1 really does mean you're about to be kicked out permanently. By October 28th, he needs to have an attorney and pay the court fees and file his paperwork, or his appeal goes away. And lastly, just because I feel like it needs another one, lawyers quit if you don't pay them. Simply because that's how he went through so many of them. When did you find out that your significant other was an actual psychopath? Long story short, I thought I was a bartender with no college experience that was dating a nuclear physicist who made $120,000 a year, and it made me feel kind of inadequate for a while. Then, on a night I'll never forget, everything changed. I took her out on a date for sushi and everything seemed fine until we went back to my place and she told me that she was inbred, her father was a, quote, world criminal that was sued by Ted Turner and is jumping countries to avoid him. She told my roommate's girlfriend that she steals and lies uncontrollably, then she flipped out and said my roommate was a Third Reich enthusiast who had a black aura. She asked some 10-year-old on Omegle.com if he wanted to, quote, put his little eggplant inside her, and then the deal breaker was that she picked up my shotty and thought it would be funny to point it at me and say, "You should propose to me and we'll get married on a magic carpet." Needless to say, I haven't talked to her since. I must clarify that this was the first night she came to my home and also the first time I saw her very, very, very drunk. And I've only known her for a few weeks prior to this event. One thing I know that she didn't lie about was her job. She showed me her job ID card. Oh wow. Is anyone else concerned about the quality of nuclear physicists in this country? I dated a guy for about 1.5 years, living with him for the last 6 months. We broke up the night he spit in my face, called me a working girl, and threatened me. A week later, he had converted to Mormonism, and 3 months later, he was engaged to a girl he had known for a month. He lives in Utah now. Bullet dodged. Girl I'd been dating for a few months had a court date for regular child custody stuff. Not my kids, so I thought, whatever. Then she didn't come home that night. I found out through her friends that her court date was her criminal trial for theft, forgery, and fraud. Off to prison for 3 years. I opted to delete her number. I dated a girl about 3 years ago that cheated on me and got pregante by the guy she cheated on me with. She tried to smother me with a pillow in my sleep after I refused to stay with her. Looks like when faced with telling you the truth, she took the soft option. The narrator included that last comment more because he was astounded at the gall of someone for commenting it just after what was probably a somewhat traumatic incident for the original author. I mean, my god, read the room, pal. Good pun, though. As a junior in high school, I broke up with my girlfriend of a couple of years to start dating this cute girl. We'll call her Amy, because that was her name. She went to the Catholic school in town. She was also an 11th grader, 17, really hot and way fun. After a few months of awesome, her giving me jewelry as gifts, walking me home from school, sneaking out to spend the night in a motel, among other things, she started to get a little weird and clingy. She wouldn't ever let me call her, but called me constantly from other people's houses. She wanted to sneak into my house to spend the night, slept in my basement one night, under my bed another, and started to call at all hours. It was obvious that her parents had no control over her, and I was suspecting substance use. None of my friends knew her, even their friends at the Catholic school hadn't heard of her. Something was weird, but DMHS, it can blind you. I was getting near breaking it off just to stop all of the weird, when one night I got a phone call. It was Amy's dad. We had a very weird talk. Turns out she had run away from home the night we started dating, months ago, and stolen a whole bunch of stuff, including his paycheck, jewelry, oh crap, I was wearing his ring, and other stuff. She had been couch surfing and running from the cops ever since, stealing, lying, cheating. It was way weird. Oh crap. So I told him I had the ring, and he could have it back. He wanted to sit down with me and talk about how to get her caught, or at least to get her to call him. I was really scared about my parents finding out what was up. I didn't want to be associated with her anymore, and I didn't want to get caught after all the crap we'd pulled. But I was worried for her. I told him to come right over. About 30 minutes later, there was a knock at my front door. This big guy was standing there when I answered. He said, "Hi, son. I need to talk to your little brother." And I said, "I'm an only child." Blink, blink, blink. "Are you Paul?" I said, "Yeah, you must be Amy's dad." He blinked and said, How old are you?" And I said, 17, same age as Amy." He started to laugh and then stopped immediately. His face got really, really red when he realized I was serious. He came in, sat down with my folks, and then started with, "So, for starters, let me get this off my chest. Amy just turned 12 last week." Holy frick. That started a real crap storm involving the cops, her friends, all middle schoolers, oh frick me, courts, her probation officer, my school counselors, and principals. To this day, I'm still stunned. As a decent-looking, semi-popular 17-year-old dude, I dumped my longtime girlfriend for an 11-year-old runaway and then spent the next several months helping the cops track her down. In short, frick. Okay, so what follows is a long story of a crazy stalker ending with his man juice all over my sheets and undies. I don't want to go into too many details just because this is a horrible memory and my memory is blurry during the worst parts. I had a high school sweetheart. We decided to break up when we went to college. It was mutual and ended on friendly terms. He was a year older and college was in a different town, so it made sense to end it there and possibly revisit the relationship in the future when I graduated. So once that ended, my ex's best friend who was staying in town started getting really flirty. I told him I couldn't date him because it would be weird, but if he wanted to continue with a friendship, I'd be down. I thought that we were on the same boat with the friendship. A group would meet up at a diner or go camping, and that was it. After a few months or so, he started really flirting, and again I turned him down. It's not cool to hit on your best friend's ex-girlfriend, especially if they're going to try and rekindle things after the break. After I turned him down again, he fricking snapped. I'd get about 100 calls or more a day. My voicemail would be full within 20 minutes with messages of him begging for me to go out with him. The messages soon got revolting. He would tickle his pickle, repeating my name, and leave that on my voicemail. He'd go into detail of all the things he wanted to do to me. We tried talking to his parents, he was still living with them, surprise, but they were in denial, so he went to the police and I was told to log everything and I was issued a temporary protective order and I changed my number. A few days later, the calls started again. I guess he paid someone to get my new number. I never found out who did it, and Singular wouldn't let me change it again for a week. So I just left my phone off and used it for emergencies only. Jump ahead a few months and I started to get flowers and cards on my car at this restaurant where I worked. Every night there'd be something there. I got so freaked out, management had to walk me to my car every night. At this time, I don't think he knew where I lived, so I had that at least. I'm still logging everything, but he has yet to do anything that would allow me to get that restraining order. I eventually get into a car accident and my car was destroyed by a lady who ran a red light and T-boned me. I got a new car a week later, and I wake up for the morning shift to find that my tires had been slashed the night I got my car. So now he knows where I live and he's destroying my property. Still, there was no proof that he did it, so the police took note, but nothing came of it. Everything gets kind of mushed together in my memory after that, because things got worse. He found out a friend's band was playing in a club and he showed up. He shoved me to the ground and jumped on me. I was the one who got kicked out because for some reason the doorman thought I was being one of those overdramatic dumb girls. I came out of my house one day and he was sitting in the backseat of my car. It took the cops 40 minutes to get there. He started leaving scarier messages. I've got the weapon. You first, then me. I'm going to go to your work and take out all your co-workers. The cops finally took me seriously after he came over and pounded on my windows during early morning. I was issued another temporary protection order and a court date to face him and get a restraining order. The court date came and he never showed up. Turns out he was couch surfing and living out of his truck, and I guess it wasn't a big enough deal for the cops to put a lot of effort into finding him. So it all just continues and it finally accumulates into the worst day of my life. I was out with a friend and I had an uneasy feeling all night. I asked if I could stay at her house for the night and she lets me stay there and we have a few drinks of wine and get a bit drunk. I wake up at 6 a.m. to go home and get ready for my morning shift at work. I get home and something seems not right. The TV in my room was on and the front door was unlocked. I figured it was my roommates and I went into the room to turn off the TV. Well, I walk in and my bed was unmade, my underwear drawer open, and my undies everywhere. I move closer to my bed, and there is splooge everywhere, white and crusty. Oof. On my pillowcases, on my underwear, on my sheets and bedspread. I'm shaking. I hear the front door slam shut. I don't know why, but my first instinct was to lock myself in the bathroom. I peek out of the window and he's there, standing on the front lawn, hysterically laughing at the house. Just laughing at the top of his lungs. I call 911. I'm crying, shaking, and barely able to talk. It took the cops a little while to get there, and by this time he's long gone. I'll never forget the look on the cop's face when they had to pack up all the stuff that he had ruined. I was given some paperwork saying that they were finally going to get him on stalking, destruction of property, and I overheard one of the cops say something about me being lucky that I didn't become a victim of the unspeakable act, which gives me freaking chills to this day. I think back on that time of my life and it's all blurry. All of these instances running into each other. I used to hate him, but now I feel sorry for him. I moved far away to get away from there and forget about everything. I never even heard if he was arrested or charged with anything. I dropped all communication with the people in my life at the time. I changed my number and never answered the phone. I still don't. This was going on between the time I was 18 and 24. I'm 29 now, and I like to think, despite everything, I came out pretty well-rounded. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not me, but an old boss of mine who had a machete hanging on his wall as some sort of ornament. One ex used it on him and didn't do too much damage. He put it back on the wall. A few months later, another guy he was dating split his face open with it. When he healed, I suggested to him that he not put the machete back this time. There are so many questions. Was your boss actually the one who was enticing these men to attack him? Or did he just have a thing for psychopaths? And of course the biggest question, did he put the blade back up on the wall? Not a crazy ex, but when I was a liberal Christian, this guy named Eli and I considered dating once, and he put me on hold to see what Jesus would have to say about it. So I waited around for a couple of months and he didn't feel like he was getting a green light from the big man upstairs, so he asks his mother to pray for us. We were 19 and in college together, away from home, so this strikes me as a huge red flag. His mother told us that she wasn't getting a sign either and revealed to me that this was the screening process that the family went through in order to find Eli the woman that God chose for him. At first, Eli was devastated and I was quite obviously offended, especially after he told me that God had someone better in store for him and that I should be happy. We went our separate ways and I ended up getting married to one of my close friends and considered myself questioning the Christian faith, leaning towards atheism. He was horrified and we stopped talking as often. He remained single and ended up courting a nice Christian, one who was more right-wing leaning and won his mother's approval, and one who was quite similar looking to me, except eventually she rejected him. He was heartbroken. So, what does Eli do to remedy this? He enlisted in the army and asked to be put on the front lines, because obviously God doesn't want him in a relationship at all and he's going to die alone. He said if he wasn't meant to have a family, he may as well sacrifice himself for the good of our country. And yes, our army actually did put him on the front lines. To clarify, no, he didn't die, he's still out there as far as I know. Apparently, according to him, he did ask to be put out there, and I don't know if they actually listened or if it's a coincidence. He made it sound as if he could have a preference, but he did end up on the front lines like he wanted. I dated a girl whose parents had died in a car accident when she was 8. After 2 years, she told me that wasn't exactly true. She had lied because her father had mistreated her when she was very little. After another 6 months, she told me that also wasn't exactly true. She was just trying to keep me from talking to them because they hated her because, surprise, she was a liar and crystal addict. We're no longer together. I should mention that her parents, foster parents of 10 years, gave her the boot when she was about 15, and she went to some state home for crappy orphans. Not to be confused with a crappy home for state orphans, by all accounts, it was a pretty nice place. But eventually, she dropped the crystal to devote all of her time to lying. I met her when she was 22, and we dated for 2.5 years, give or take a couple of months, until I just couldn't stand her anymore. I remember some of the lies she came up with were really impressive for their realism. She was truly gifted. I know a pathological liar. I don't date him, but now I'm thinking about how it would be for the people who would. I love torturing him to no end about his lies. Apparently, he killed someone. Also apparently, he's heavily invested in oil. Oh, he ordered a custom BMW that's been on the way for 5 years. He's setting up a worldwide organization to protect the world from evil. I have too much fun going along with his crap. I even helped him set up his, quote, organization. I put him in touch with some programmer friends I have so that they could do some work for him. I did warn them that he was crazy first. He never actually asked them to do anything. I checked up with them. I drove him to the bank because he doesn't have a car so that he could open up a bank account and put about 200 grand in it for the use of the organization. Naturally, I never saw the transfer or the opening of the account. There was plenty more stuff as well. Oh, and I'm officially part of this organization, which is divided into a cell structure, so I'm not allowed to know who else is in it. No one, I suspect. I'm a little worried that I'm going to end up being signed up for some revolutionary group and get arrested, but it's too much fun seeing where this is going. And to be clear, he is harmless, just crazy, fun crazy. I mean, let's hope that it's all harmless crazy. Kinda seems like if he's actually your friend, you should maybe look at getting him some help? But then again, who knows if he'd accept it, so what do I know? I dated a girl for a while that I actually knew for at least a year before ever transitioning from friend of friend to dating. I quickly came to realize she was a pathological liar, and she made no attempt to hide that from me. I mean, yes, she'd tell me all kinds of outrageous lies, but she'd also tell other people lies about us, in front of me. One time, we met some friends at a club, and she immediately told them that we'd spent the day in Canada. Apparently, we'd driven 5 hours in the morning, spent the day, driven 5 hours back, and we were now meeting people in this trans-dimensional day that would have been at least 40 hours long. People were looking at me like, what the frick? And I was just making, fricked if I know, face. Over the course of the few months that we dated, she told me that her father was in prison and her mother was institutionalized. Neither of these was true, by the way. That her brother was a substance user. Her brother lived with her, had a good job, and was not one of those. That her ex-husband was a smack addict. She had never been married. She worked for the governor's office. We were nowhere near the capital, and I never found out what her real job was. That she had a hoo-ha piercing accidentally torn out, which is why she had no fun bean, except she totally did. She said that she loved doing it in the butt. and would rather do it in the butt than anything else. She never actually agreed to do it in the butt with me. I could probably keep on for a while. I literally only dated her a couple of months before I had had enough. I was trying to break up with her gently when I saw a tow truck hooking up to my car outside her apartment, so I ran away mid-letdown saying, "You're too crazy!" over my shoulder as I ran. I dated a guy for over a year who turned out to be a completely charming sociopath. I was 20 and newly in love. He was 27. In retrospect, there were a lot of signs that he was dysfunctional, but being naive and in love, I brushed them off. Things were fine until one day after I'd been sick for a couple of weeks when he just turned on me, dumped me the day before my birthday in an email. I was heartbroken and in shock, and I hadn't seen it coming at all. Anyway, instead of leaving it at that, I guess the guy wanted to mess with me. So he'd keep coming to my campus every weekend, even though he was older and had never finished college, to drink with all of my friends and then come to my room and declare that he had changed his mind and still loved me. I was young and stupid and heartbroken and kept falling for it. Well, he'd borrow money and then run off the next day. If I'd call him later in the week, I'd be met with coldness until the next time he was looking for a lay. The thing is, I found it so hard to recognize this D-bag behavior because I still thought the year-long relationship had been legit. The worst thing was he was telling everyone I was a complete psycho behind my back. He'd do things like text me that he loved me and wanted to see me. Then when I'd call or text to reply, he'd show it to my friends and say I was stalking him. He spun lie after lie about me. So every time I wanted to talk to someone about how I was hurting from his awful behavior, it just confirmed all the lies he'd been telling about me. The final straw was when he asked me to invite him to my graduation. He fed me some bullcrap lines about respecting me. I didn't have any family attending since I was on another continent, so I was feeling forever alone and I said yes. Well, he decided to take a bunch of white snow and never took my picture when I got the diploma. He later that day tried to break my arm. That was obviously the final straw, and I finally saw the light of how evil and cruel he was. The unfortunate thing was that my reputation among my friends was ruined. I'd been given the crazy girlfriend label. It was so frustrating. He'd been deliberately orchestrating situations to make me seem crazy and emotional just to sabotage my reputation. I don't think I've ever felt more helpless in my life. All you want to do is yell and talk crap about this monster, but you can't, because people will just think you're crazy and resentful. It took me 2 years of holding my head high and watching my step before the social stigma he'd inflicted was lifted. I never talked smack about him, and I made sure that no matter how upset I was feeling, I acted cool and rational and collected. I was forced to be a saint because he had painted me as a crazy demon. It was one of the hardest times of my life. But to end on a semi-good note, eventually the truth came out and people saw he was a crazy, awful man, and I was the sane victim. 3 years after the darkest and loneliest era of my life, my best friend called me to apologize for not believing me. My friends had finally seen the truth and said how sorry they were that they hadn't supported me while I was being hurt so badly. I think part of what made it so hard is the fact that there was such a stereotype about crazy ex-girlfriends. He played into it perfectly and used it as a tool to keep me trapped in the cycle of abuse by way of removing my support network. Also, I know it's not much in the way of proof, but this is the only ex I've ever had drama or bad feelings towards. I'm on very friendly terms with every other ex-boyfriend of mine, and I've had no bad things to say about them or them about me, beyond the fact that we weren't fully compatible for spending the rest of our lives together. My ex would surprise me on a lot of occasions. One of the best, by which I mean worst, times was when she came over to my parents' house for dinner. It was actually only the second time they'd met her, and I told her to try and make an impression. The girl was enthusiastic, if anything, and was eager to please, so she said she'd do her best. When we got there, everything was going pretty well. She hadn't forgot their names yet, got on great with the family dog, and hadn't even burped or tooted yet. It was too good to be true. As the first course was being served, like literally as my mum was bringing over some Parma ham and mozzarella cheese, she's Italian and her cooking is amazing by the way, my ex jumps up from the table and yelps. Horrified, I look over at her as she stumbles away from the chair and towards my mother, kicking furiously at something underneath the table. It's all in slow motion as I realize that my ex is kicking at her own handbag, which was now emptied all over the floor, and a huge freaking adult toy has just spilled out into the open. I scream in shock as she reaches down, grabs said toy and throws it with some force at my father, who just sat open-mouthed for this whole episode. You'd think that would be it, but remember how I just said he was open-mouthed? The yellow, eggplant-shaped toy hurtles towards him and actually partly enters his gaping maw. I guess that was the climax of that particular dinner. Tattoo artists, what absolute scum have you had to deal with on the job? I spent the better part of the workday freehanding and outlining a dragon back piece on a woman in her early 20s. She had several pieces on her back that she had received from a kitchen wizard that we were covering as well, so that raised the difficulty a couple of notches. Her boyfriend and best friend hung out, chatted, and watched movies all evening while we worked. All in all, not a bad time, until it was time to pay. As we finished up and put the bandage on, she turned to me and said, "Okay, so I get paid next Tuesday. Is it okay if I come back and pay you then?" I laughed because obviously she was joking, right? She had to be joking. She'd better be joking. When I realized she wasn't, I said, "No, that's not how this works. Someone is going to have to pay before you leave." She turned to her boyfriend and asked, "You got this, right?" He laughed and said, "You know damn well I don't have any money." She looked to her best friend, who conveniently found something interesting on the ceiling, so she was no help either. The client then turned to me, puffed up a bit, trying to look more serious than I did, and asked, "Well, what are you going to do if we just leave? You can't keep us here." I figured this was going to be our next course of action, and she was right, I couldn't detain them. It gets into a grey area near the border of kidnapping and not something that I wanted to chance. But what I did do was point out to her that I had her release form with all her information and a photocopy of her ID. I let her know the second they walk out the door, I'd contact the police and report them for theft of services. Thinking it over for a few minutes, they sat back down and she started making phone calls, trying to scrape together the cash to avoid police involvement. About an hour later, a half hour past closing, a guy shows up with a fistful of bills for me, and that's when all hell breaks loose. Her last-ditch effort, it seems, was to call the guy she was cheating on her boyfriend with. The guy throws the money on the counter and starts a screaming match with the client and the boyfriend, while the best friend just stands there yelling at everyone. Their use of adjectives was impressive. Somehow I managed to wrangle the herd of cats out the door so I can lock up the shop. By the time I got everything closed down, the screaming match had turned into a fistfight in the parking lot, and someone at the fast food joint a few doors down had called the cops anyway. Shop locked up, money in hand, I noped the frick out and let the cops do their job. Thankfully, I never saw any of them again. That was a wild swing and a miss from that tattoo recipient. I don't know what her intended outcome was there or what she expected, but I guess from her perspective, at least one or both of the guys she was dating were locked up and not her. This isn't even my worst one, but it's just one that sticks with me. In 1995, my client had decided to not be alive anymore. In the grieving process, his 3 surviving sisters wanted to get tattooed by me to help connect with their brother who'd passed away. It was a weird day, not because of the requests or the fact that I was doing memorial tattoos, but because you could feel the tension between the family. My client's death had prematurely brought these siblings together, and somehow, spending the afternoon together in a tattoo shop, they'd started to forgive each other, and their underlying resentments had started to wash away. It was really great to watch these adult children bond again. So lastly, I tattooed a new boyfriend for one of the sisters. He wasn't getting a memorial tattoo, he was getting a bullhead. This was the first time he'd met the extended family. While I tattooed the boyfriend, the girls returned from shopping at a head shop next door. They were showing off some shirts they bought while the boyfriend was in the chair. He saw a Nirvana shirt that the girls had just purchased and said, "Hey, he blew his head off too." And I sat for 39 more minutes in complete discomfort. I love when this question comes up. I managed a shop and occasionally we'd get Nazis and juggalos. At a friend's shop, whenever Nazis would come in asking for swastikas, he'd tell them $3,000 for your chest, but $50 for your hands or face, and it had to be done by the guy who was from the Philippines who tattooed at their shop. Not an artist, but I spent a lot of time in shops. This one girl who came in to get an outline for this absolutely massive back piece with wings or some stuff, the artist who's doing the piece keeps telling us how hot she is and how excited he is to do it. She comes in and she is gorgeous. She takes her shirt completely off and unhooks her bra. The artist shoots us all this creeper grin. Then he starts the first line. The girl starts full-on screaming. I've never heard anything like it. Just a continuous scream the entire time the needle is touching her skin. Then every 10 seconds she'd decide that she had had enough, without warning, and she'd try to wriggle away. Each time the guy would almost screw up his line and freak out. Cut to her crying and half undressed on the ground, with the artist screaming at her about how he's never going to be able to finish, and if she doesn't stop, he's kicking her out. He had barely finished a single feather. The girl promises to be better and lays down. The guy starts the tattoo thing again and is about to start when she lets out another scream. He hasn't even touched her yet. He slowly takes off the gloves, packs up his stuff, and tells the girl to get the frick out. I was in a shop with a friend who was getting some dumb nautical stars tattooed around his elbow. He was standing up and getting the stencils lined up properly, and he locked his knees out. He hadn't eaten anything at all and promptly passed out, smashing his forehead on the counter on his way down. He bled everywhere and then badmouthed the shop like crazy because he was embarrassed, because apparently it was their fault that he can't stand without nearly dying. We're not friends any longer. He was definitely that artist's worst client. I worked in a shop for nearly 10 years and only had to throw out a couple of people. This guy came in with his girlfriend and 16-year-old daughter. He decides on what he wants and runs to the gas station before getting started. While the artist was doing his thing, the guy would have his girlfriend bring in his drink for him so he could take a couple of sips. He was also talking about pimping her out after he got his tattoo because he wanted to recoup his costs. This seemed a little awkward with the teen right there, but whatever. By the way, tattoo artists aren't therapists, and they usually aren't degenerate hedonists who revel in your debauchery either. We judge you just as much as any other stranger you might greet, but we don't say anything because you've given us money and we want our product to look good. So he's working on plans to pimp out his girlfriend and keeps sipping on his drink every few minutes. About halfway through, he starts saying the tattoo doesn't look right. The artist explains that it's because it isn't finished. This guy becomes more belligerent, and it hits me that he isn't just drinking soda, so I tell her she can't take him any more drinks. The artist is really angry now but just wants to finish the piece, and the guy is getting more angry each time I remind him he isn't getting more to drink while he's in our shop. Finally, with a half-finished tattoo, he decides to let us know he's gonna kick all of our butts. I think he went for his drink first because he walked into the lobby area and was looking around while I grabbed the whomping stick and helped the artist run him out and lock the door. The guy is outside yelling while the artist is on the phone with the cops. The girlfriend is saying she feels like we're kidnapping her, and the teen is obviously very embarrassed and occasionally mumbling that everyone is stupid. We explain to the girlfriend that she can leave, but the guy isn't coming back in without getting his wig split, so we let her out when the guy had wandered around a corner. I apologized to the teen on the way out for her unfortunate home life. This guy would occasionally call to let us know he was going to come back and fill us all with lead, but after a few weeks he stopped. And that's my story. What a colorful and fascinating clientele. I'm certain that the vast majority of people who get tattoos have never done anything illegal, by the way, so don't let this video color your perceptions. We did ask them to submit their worst customers, and they sure are supplying. Years ago, when I tattooed, the shop I worked at Friday night closed at 2 a.m. A man comes in with some friends around midnight and one woman. The guy is hanging all over this woman, and most are pretty tipsy, if not drunk, nothing new for a late Friday night. The guy wants a tattoo with the woman's name, Brandy, on his eggplant. We all say no. He's pretty adamant he's not leaving without getting that tattoo. The shop owner's son says he'll do it, double the cost, flat rate of $125. The guy agrees. He gets his tattoo, the woman loves it, and they leave. Next morning, get to the shop around 10 a.m. to open up and start cleaning the place. The guy from the last night is outside pacing in front of the shop. We walk up and he starts telling us how badly he needs us to cover that tattoo up. We tell him we can't, the location is too sensitive and it would need to heal before we do anything or it'll look like ground beef. He doesn't care. He needs it done ASAP. Why? The guy was getting married later that day, and the girl from the night before, the one whose name was on his junk, was a stripper for his bachelor party. We use Vaseline to help the needle glide over the skin and to stop the ink from spreading over the stencil and surface of the skin. I keep the Vaseline on the back of my left hand while I tattoo with my right. Client reaches across, dabs her own goddamn motherfrickin' finger in my Vaseline, and then proceeds to moisturize her lips. I was too stunned to say anything other than to look up and slowly shake my head, while in the calmest of voices saying, "No, we don't do that." So I was doing some after-hours work for trade on this dude on his wife. I gave them half sleeves in return for a handful of pistols and rifles. They transferred the ownership ahead of time legally because Canada. So I've already got the items and can't back out. The first sit, the guy is a total whiner. Like constantly moving and complaining, he wants a smoke break every 15 minutes, so it's a little unsurprising when he asks if he can take some Ativan, which is an anti-anxiety medication, for next time. Thinking that he meant like 1 to 2 pills, and having never heard of anyone going overboard on them before, I said sure. My mistake. The second sit, the wife drops him off and he takes like 5 or 6 pills, then another 5 or 6 pills right before we start. It's about this time that I recommend maybe he should go a little lighter. Nope, the guy just keeps popping them like candy until he's basically a zombie. We take a break and he hobbles and shuffles to the bathroom, comes back with his pants half off and spattered with wee-wee stains. Then he goes to take more pills and drops the canister, scattering them everywhere, and I get to watch while he picks them up in slow motion, slobber speaking, "I'm sorry, man. Please don't hate me." I'm well past the point where I would have kicked any other client out, but I still technically owe him several hours and just wanted to get it over with. So for some reason, we keep going. Eventually, he passes out, and after making sure he was breathing and okay, I just lean down on his arm to keep him still, and I plow on for another few hours while he drifts in and out of consciousness, asking me crap like if I want to go to a rub and tug with him. "You ever been to a rub and tug?" No, man. It's a massage, and they give you a happy ending after." Yeah, I know." "You want to go right now?" No thanks." "But it's great, man. They give you a happy ending after." I'll pass." Eventually, his wife comes by to pick him up. She's mortified and embarrassed, apologizing profusely. Apparently, they aren't together anymore, and I still tattoo her semi-regularly. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. While getting my tattoo on my back, I had to take my shirt off. The tattoo artist wouldn't stop hitting on me. As the session was coming to an end, he said, "So I've got your number already. Would you mind if I call you?" I still had my shirt off. He was still tattooing my back, so if I said no, I was afraid he'd screw it up. So I said sure. I had to explain to my now husband why my tattoo artist wouldn't stop calling me. Another girl posted a negative review a month or so later saying the guy had hit on her while she was getting tattooed, she had said no, and he'd done a terrible job. I was getting the outlines of my sleeve finished when I noticed this average, normal-looking guy start twitching while being tattooed. The artist then became noticeably uncomfortable, and then about 5 minutes later, I crap you not, the guy went number 2 while getting his back piece. The reasoning was he was too scared to ask for the bathroom. He sat through the whole ordeal. I apprenticed at a tattoo shop for about 2 years in college. I ended up leaving, by which I mean running for the hills, when I finally wised up to the fact that the owner had virtually no intent of advancing me in any way. He just liked to hit on me and use me to get his takeaways, and was using the very crappy shop mainly as a front to sell his homemade substances. He once allowed me the privilege of tattooing the head of his Johnson. I should note I actually tattooed it twice. He was satisfied with the first go, and I ended up tattooing something on the shaft a little later. I'd pledged to myself when I decided I wanted to seriously pursue tattoo that I would never pass up any opportunity to practice or learn, so I'd agreed to all of this. It was about as awkward as you'd expect both times, especially because an eggplant needs to be hard for you to tattoo it. The tattoo came out good, but in the end it wasn't worth having to stare at that creep's sausage for 20 minutes while he made awkward comments and my co-workers watched. I'll be forever grateful for what I did learn in my last 6 months there, though. They hired on an older female artist who took a liking to me and ended up teaching me a lot and giving me more and more opportunities to tattoo. The bottom line was that the owner hated seeing me do actual work and tried really hard to discourage any progress that was being made. It was a real weird and bad dynamic from the beginning, as he was a piercer, not even a tattoo artist, and would basically just force me on whatever unwilling artist he was employing at the time. They never lasted long. Well, as much as we all would have loved to hear about how you wrote micro-soft on this former boss's member, I guess we can settle for being happy for you for getting out of there and learning so much from that other artist. I recently tattooed a cop who clearly snuck out of rehab to get his fix. The guy was absolutely wired on something and asked another artist's client if he looked like a smackhead. I didn't realize he was on substances when I started the tattoo. He signed a waiver saying he wasn't. I also tattooed a married man who tried to put his hand up my skirt during the tattoo. I have many more. I'm not an artist, but spending time with my ones, I've seen a steroid beast getting a back piece, needed a break to pace the room every 5 to 10 minutes. The girl doing his piece was becoming visibly more agitated every single time. Another time, a shop manager comes in laughing about something, shows an artist an email that had been sent to the shop. Would it be possible to book in again to make the lines in my tattoo a little thinner? Also, me and a guy that does mine having a smoke break halfway through. The shop being near a train station means we're in Junkie Central. A junkie proceeds to inquire if the shop does UV tattoos. No? Well, what if he brings his own ink? What if he offers to pay in booze and substances because he doesn't like handling money? The barter system is back, people. Many years ago, I'd been working and traveling around many countries across Asia, and since I was in Koh Pha Ngan, Thailand, at the time, I took a few days off to unwind. Over the next few days, I regularly saw this Danish girl at some of the beach bars. She had a large tattoo that looked fairly fresh, going down the right side of her back and torso. The tattoo was a phrase in Punjabi rather than the typical Asian scripts of Sanskrit, Chinese, or Japanese. You don't see a lot of those, so it really stuck out. I'm originally from this area in India. I finally mustered up enough courage to speak to her and asked her what the tattoo said. According to her, it was an old hippie Sanskrit proverb about bringing peace and love to the world. She had gotten this while traveling across India. She seemed so happy relaying her Indian travel stories, the mysticism, and why she finally got her very first tattoo. I felt so bad for her knowing what it really said. The characters were written so large I couldn't see how she could maybe convert it into something else. The impression I got from her was that she had left India earlier than anticipated, so I asked about this. Turns out the last few weeks she had been hassled by quite a lot of guys. Even the tattoo artist was gropey and seemed angry when she kept turning his advances down over multiple visits, simply wanting the tattoo to be finished. I finally told her what the tattoo was, and she was mortified. Not believing me at first, I Skyped a female cousin of mine in India who confirmed what I'd said. The poor girl couldn't stop crying. She always wore something over her bikini after that. The tattoo actually read, "This B word is a word for working girl. Use her and abuse her." I have no idea what happened to her afterwards as I had to get back to work, but I'm presuming she had to somehow get the tattoo removed, which going by the size would have been very expensive and painful. Poor girl. I used to have this client. Just thinking about her makes me angry. So we had a minimum price policy at the shop I was at back then. Anything that takes 45 minutes or less is $100. She'd come in every single week and try to fit as many Christian-related things as she could into that time frame, to the point where she just looked like she was covered in a bunch of fridge magnets. Now, I don't make very much off that $100 price tag. $50 goes to the shop, and close to $15 goes towards my material for doing the tattoo. Also, this woman was just really annoying. She imagined someday we were going to be able to tie in all these completely random images into some cohesive piece. Despite the fact that she refused to do anything longer than the minimum 45-minute session, she'd constantly moan in disturbing half-pain or kind of pleasurable ways when I tattooed her. She was constantly asking me about my faith, and I'd try to dodge that since I'm an atheist. She'd also try to make unrelated symbols into Christian ones somehow. A really good example of this is when she came in for an anchor tattoo. I asked her how she wanted it colored. She wanted the metal hooks on the bottom to be blue and the cross to be orange. I asked her what she meant by the cross, and she pointed to the eye, stock, and shank of the anchor, insisting that it was a cross. I politely explained to her that those have nothing to do with Christianity and are simply engineering design functions. She insisted that the anchor is a Christian symbol because Christians were the first sailors. Oh my god. I was already at the point where I'd been getting sick of this lady. She had been coming in for months and generally being more trouble than she was worth every time. I did tattoos for her anyways because of money up till then. Luckily for me, it was at a time I started getting busier with good projects and clients that didn't want to nitpick every tiny detail of their already really simple tattoos. This lady would call and I wouldn't have time because she refused to do anything but walk-ins. Eventually, she started coming in to try and speak to me when I was busy with other clients, asking me why I couldn't just get her in between big 3 and 5 hour appointments, as if I don't need a break to eat lunch or have a cigarette. I politely explained this to her and that people who book ahead get preference since they put money down. Not only that, but myself and almost anyone in the industry prefers to do bigger projects rather than trying to cram as many tiny things in as possible into a 45-minute time period. Sure, we make $100 in 45 minutes, but it's $150 per hour when people are committing to come in for 3 to 5 hours, sometimes more, and that's a lot better for me. Eventually, I went on a trip to Thailand with my girlfriend for 4 months. She eventually started going to another artist in the shop who was better able to fit her in. It also helped that he was born deaf, so he didn't have to listen to her Christian rambling or the weird noises she'd make when getting tattooed. I've since moved shops and have a much better deal here and a much better commission as well. She came up in conversation once when I first started at this shop. Turns out she'd pulled the same sort of thing here years before and they stopped answering the phone when her name came up on call display, and everyone was always too busy when she had come in. I kind of feel bad for her. She always had the appearance of some sort of illness, and she quite possibly could have had a mental illness too. The really sad thing is that for the amount of money she spent in a year, she could have had most of her body done in something big and beautiful and still religious in meaning. Instead, she's got a bunch of crappy, albeit well-done, small tattoos all over her. What's the weirdest thing you've seen someone do to save a buck? I was working in a restaurant in Montreal and the staff decided to all have a picnic and a few beers together. We all pitched in to get steaks, salads, and drinks. I invited a friend that didn't work with us and he showed up with a potato. Yep, 1 potato. He drank the beer, ate salad and steak. Oh, and he ate his potato too. Ugh. My brother had an old Fiat 127. The gas style hadn't worked for a while, so sometimes he'd run out of gas. One time he was with my young nephew when it happened again. They pushed it for like half a mile. Arriving at the gas station, he realized it was rather more expensive than another gas station further up the road, so they pushed it for another half mile. I mean, if he was really smart, he'd just push the car everywhere and never have to pay for gas. My mate lays out a certain number of sheets of toilet roll if you ask to use his loo. My grandmother, as she didn't own a computer, had to mail in all of her bill payments. 1 month, she didn't get her hot water bill, or it was delivered to someone else by accident. Whatever the cause, her next bill was for both that month and the previous month, and included a late fee that was less than the cost of a stamp. For the rest of her life, she skipped the bill 1 month and then paid both the next because she saved a few cents by just using 1 stamp instead of 2. This was a woman who had somewhere around a few $1 million in the bank when she died. I went for a meal with a group of about 6 friends. When it came time to divvy up the bill, one friend said he hadn't got cash on him, but if we all chipped in the cash for our share, he'd put it on his card. He was also very keen to ensure we all put in a decent tip. It was in the UK, so tipping is common in a restaurant but not required. Our friend went up to the bar to pay, but unfortunately for him, another member of our party went to the restroom at the same time and was surprised to notice him paying in cash. We pulled him up on this, and it turned out the stingy bastard was using our tips to cover his part of the meal. This chap has forevermore been ribbed as having short arms and deep pockets. He's trusted by no one. And rightfully mistrusted. That's an impressive level of d-baggery. I hope that he was a truly entertaining guy to have around, because I'd actually be pretty annoyed about someone else trying to use me as their restaurant meal financer. My dad once took a broken fork to the aerospace company he worked for and had a highly skilled welder weld it back together. This was a cheap, crap dinner fork. I was at a friend's apartment about 5 years ago for a moving-in get-together for about 10 other people. Halfway through the party, I used the bathroom, and when I went to wash my hands, I noticed he had not got around to buying hand towels yet. Giving him some slack and understanding it was his first place, I figured I'd just grab a few squares of toilet paper and simply dab my hands with that. That's not a big deal, but the roll of toilet paper was empty, so I just dried my hands on my pants and let my friend know he needed to replace the roll. After I told him, this mother fricker walked into the bathroom, grabbed what he thought were the cleanest squares of used toilet paper from the trash can, and wrapped them around the empty roll. I don't know what the heck those squares were used for or what possessed him to do something so unsanitary and absurd, but I didn't end up staying at the party much longer to ask him why. It was very easily the cheapest, stingiest, and most disgusting thing I've witnessed in my life. I wasn't really very close to the guy who threw the party, and that basically confirmed that I wouldn't be making any attempts to further the friendship. My mum's cousin would invite us over for a barbecue and go around to each person and ask if they wanted a hamburger or a hot dog. I got the stink eye once for asking to have one of each. When it got dark out, her husband would want to do a fireworks show and asked everyone to chip in money for it. They were cheap fireworks too, or to be more accurate, some sparks danced around on the ground for a few seconds. One of their dogs was a massive jerk when it came to food. We had dessert pastries, and right as I was bringing my eclair to my mouth, this monster of a dog jumped up onto me and snatched it right out of my hands. Because of the whole one-per-person ration, I had no dessert that day. Another time, the dog attempted to eat their younger daughter's hot dog. He didn't actually get it, but several of us had witnessed that the hot dog had been licked. My cousin and her husband said that their daughter could still eat it. She was only 3 years old and she wouldn't know the difference anyway. My uncle eventually stepped up, taking the hot dog and throwing it in the trash can, leaving them the options of making one more hot dog, because we all knew there were more in the freezer, or letting their daughter starve because they were too cheap to make extra food. I think they've been less stingy since that incident, but none of us go to their barbecues anymore. I used to work as a waiter for the country club. I had a woman tell me she was done with her plate, so I cleared it off the table. When I returned to ask if they wanted dessert, she asks, "Where are my leftovers?" I calmly responded that she had no food left on her plate. Her response was, "Oh, I wanted you to box up the skin from my baked potato so I could give it to my dog." She requested to see the manager, $80 bill completely free of charge. To this day, I swear she had it planned the whole time. A school friend's dad made her bread sandwiches because he didn't want to, quote, waste money on pointless fillings when the bread would swell your stomach with water. Oh, and that sandwich fillings were part of a capitalist machine that rules us all. In college, I lived with 4 other guys and they refused to buy toilet paper. It was disgusting. They'd just crap and then hop in the shower to wash off, but never had toilet paper. Oftentimes, if they really needed to go number 2 but didn't want to go through the trouble of showering afterwards, they'd get someone else to go and get napkins from the McDonald's that was super close to us. I had my own darn toilet paper and I wasn't letting them use it up just to never replace it. I did this several times. But then one of my roommates, I guess, was like, "Frick it, I'll take one for the team." He worked at a gym, so he took a massive roll of toilet paper that goes to their public restrooms. I mean like a 16-inch diameter but 2.5-inch wide wheel of toilet paper. Cheap mother frickers, but I guess that's college. When I was a teen, a guy who I respected a lot paid me to rake his yard. After we were done, he drove me home and on the way he stopped at a local country store to buy a soda and snack. I didn't expect him to pay for me because I had my own money now that I'd just earned raking his yard, so I put my merch on the checkout counter and then he slid his stuff beside mine like he's going to pay, except he didn't. The clerk looked to me since I had money to pay for it and he looks at me too as if to say, "Well, pay her." I was confused but paid for it. He apologized later and I lost respect for him. My flatmate stole toilet paper from his office when it was his turn to buy. Only, he stole 1 roll and thought that was the equivalent of the 16-pack the rest of us bought. Seriously, you don't have to buy that often and it's like $2 to $3 for a 16-pack. Maybe he's embarrassed to buy toilet paper. Imagine the look on the cashier's face when he or she sees that you wipe your butt like an animal. I'm with your roomie on this one. I think all of us have had a flatmate this stingy in university. I think how hard we really judge him lies on whether he's older than his mid-20s. You should have had that behavior bullied right out of you by that point. Went out to dinner, the check came in. Let's say it was a total of $40 for 4 people. 3 of us put in $12 each for our parts and tips. The 4th person looked at the cash we put down, counted it, and put in $4. My friend's dad would abuse Walmart's return policy. He'd do things like get a gallon of milk, drink most of it, fill it back up with water, and take it back to exchange it. I've heard people admit they'll go to Costco for lunch and just walk around to every sample table, getting little free bites until they're full. Which is weird considering Costco sells actual lunch food at their food court for like $2, and they're giant portions too. A family friend of mine once told his parents that he was sharing his school lunches with a classmate, and that he was worried about this classmate's financial situation. His parents were concerned too. They met with the principal. Eventually, they asked their child which classmate specifically was in possible financial trouble. He named a kid from one of the wealthiest families in the country, billionaires. We think he'll probably be okay. I'm sure there's much worse than this, but my boss is a millionaire. He owns a lot of companies, is well known in his industry, and is generally a baller. He splurges on us if we've done well, always picks up the tab if we're out, doesn't put a spending cap on things like Christmas parties, but one time I had to fly from the UK to America. To save money, I had to get 4 flights instead of 1 direct one. My journey took 24 hours instead of 11, and I had to do 3 days' work in the US literally 7 hours after I landed, jet lag and all. As if that wasn't annoying enough, the flight was booked to take off at 9 a.m. That meant getting to the airport at 6 a.m. I don't live anywhere near an airport and had to travel south to London, then get across London and then travel south for another hour to the airport. The whole journey could have been done in 3 hours at a push. Due to the time of day, public transport was limited. There was one train I could get that would have allowed me to make it. Considering there would have been 6 stages to my journey, I didn't want to risk any delays that would mean me missing my flight. An old neighbor of mine was a taxi driver. I called him up, got mates rates on the journey, the taxi costing a whole £10 more than my public transport journey would have done, but taking less than a third of the time. And he threw something of a fit in front of the entire office about this, about how it was lazy, about how there were ways I could do it on public transport that would be cheaper. He didn't understand that not living in London means I'm limited to 1 train per hour and there's no 24-hour buses. If the train doesn't show up or is late, that's it. After a while, he calmed down and said it was fine to get the taxi if I didn't take any luggage. He wanted me to travel with just hand luggage. It wouldn't have been the end of the world if I didn't have to carry about 50 brochures, a ton of contracts, and loads of other crap which filled half a normal suitcase. He also said I could just wear my suit on the plane, the same suit I was going to wear for the next 3 days to save space. I was traveling for over 24 hours each way and going to the West Coast in peak summertime where temperatures were 45 degrees Celsius during the day. It was so weird to see such a generous man being so uptight about what was only about £50 worth of extra costs to make the experience remotely bearable. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friend sat in his car for 3 hours on a Saturday night rather than pay a $5 cover charge. Well, my roommate, despite often bragging about how much money he's saved up and buying green herb every other day, so he's clearly got plenty to spend, uses my significant others and my toothpaste, picks up my used razors out of the trash can and uses them on himself. When it's his turn to buy toilet paper, he buys a 4-pack of the smallest, crappiest quality TP he can find. I'm pretty sure he'd buy 1 roll at a time if he could. He uses my shampoo and tries to hide it by putting water in it back up to full. When my significant other began his brewing hobby, my roommate was all for helping out in exchange for beer, until he realized he was expected to chip in and help with the process. That partnership ended really quickly. He broke the toaster trying to cook hash browns in it, and I don't mean the oval-shaped ones. He tried to buy one at a crappy thrift shop and complained he had to buy a brand new one at a full price. A whopping $30. A real winner, that guy. In this video today, we're uncovering a somewhat well-known phenomenon that those who are financially well off are as often as not massive cheapskates. And half the time, it's people who are born into money, not just the ones who've accrued their wealth by scrimping and saving their whole lives. Maybe certain people just have a cheap gene that affects the rich and poor alike. I met with 3 buddies at a very nice bar and restaurant. Let's call them Bob, John, and Travis. John's been going to this place for years, and the owner is an extremely close friend of his. Because of this, we got comped drinks all night. I'm not just talking beers, but scotch, vodka, other things. Maybe about $100 worth of free booze between us. Great times, right? No. Why? Because Bob is a cheap, bloody, smelly little C-word. So we're drinking our butts off free of charge, and we're also ordering food to make up for it. Pasta, chicken, fish, the works. But Bob? Bob isn't happy because Bob doesn't want to pay for anything. So what does Bob do? He asks for the special appetizer for $10, but asks the owner to make it dinner-sized. The owner responds, "Do you mean that you want the dinner instead of the appetizer?" Duh. Alright, so we pig the frick out. We drink our butts off, Bob's wasted. We wait and wait and wait for Bob to eat a table-sized platter all by himself. Frick you, Bob. And then we get the bill. As I've noted, it's about $100 less than it should have been, and we are all thrilled. Well, we're all thrilled except for Bob, because Bob's meal is $19 instead of $10. As John reminds him that he drank his own weight in free liquor and begs him not to make a scene, Bob proceeds to go up to the owner behind the bar and throw a fricking fit about the $9 he should have saved on his special dinner-sized appetizer. The owner is stunned, John is furious, Travis hates confrontation, so Travis slinks out the door, and I'm just a wallflower. Bob slams his fist on the counter, Bob points at the chalkboard, Bob whines and whines and whines that he doesn't have the money to pay for the extra $9, though he works a really frickin' cushy job and eats out 3 times a day. He calls the owner names, he cries, he actually cries. Then he sits his bloated butt down, pitches in $10 and refuses to tip. And he smiles. The C-word is fricking smiling, and that set John off. John flips his crap, calls Bob every name in the book, and makes a go at me for trying to cover Bob just to get us the heck out of this place. He gets up on his chair. He throws handfuls of money in Bob's face like the guy is some fat, hairy Russian exotic dancer. Women are stunned, the owner is laughing, Travis is looking in the window, and I'm stuck with Bob as John finally pays the bill, tips his friend $100, and stomps outside, sending Travis flailing down the street. Bob looks at me, I look back at him, and his only reaction, "What a Jew, am I right?" I leave Bob at the table alone. We don't eat with Bob anymore. Let me walk you through all the fascinating financial specimens that are my family. 1. My great-grandmother apparently took a Ziploc to buffets and after eating would go back one last time, pile food on her plate, and then store it in the bag. She grew up during the Great Depression, though. I grew up with a really thrifty family, so I have more. We ended up going to a lot of events for free because my dad was super stingy, but he wanted our family to have fun even if we didn't have a lot of money to spend on entertainment. So 2. My dad randomly became friends with a woman we met at the movies. She had handfuls of free tickets to movies before they were widely released, just so the movie critics could watch a show with a full audience. We ended up seeing hundreds of movies for free, even though we had to get there early for good seats. These were the best types of showings too, because they held promotions and gave out free posters, t-shirts, and knickknacks. Saw a lot of good movies and some really bad ones. I still know we have a Pan's Labyrinth poster up in the attic somewhere. I think we have a shirt from The Dark Knight too. 3. Speaking about free events, my dad signed up for some Disney theme parks roster whenever they would film something at Disney World and needed extras. I think he knew about this from chatting with some random strangers who worked for Disney and befriending them as well. We'd go to film shoots and each person got a one-day ticket to any Disney theme park. This was the only way we could afford Disney for 4 people without a year-long pass. Unfortunately, Disney isn't as fun without money because you miss out on a lot of the food and souvenirs, but other than that, it was nice to attend for free. Speaking of food, we'd bring food from home to eat instead of eating there. Some film shoots were early in the morning and we could roam the park the same day before everyone else showed up, so we were the first in line for everything. It was pretty nice. And 4, my dad has this strange habit of befriending random strangers at events and them having extra tickets to places. He'd also have friends that knew about free concerts and festivals everywhere in the state of Florida. We had free tickets to see the circus twice, the Knights Jousting on Horses dinner thing, medieval times, a lot of figure ice skating shows, so many museums, and a crapload of concerts. 5. He and my mum always entered radio contests and they were lucky enough to win a lot of them. More free concerts and some really good seats. Once saw Elton John in the first few rows. Saw Michael Bublé just when he was getting popular. Funny story, during the concert, Michael hugged my mum. 6. My dad would bid on eBay for vacations to timeshares on weeks the owners couldn't use instead of buying nights for hotels. We stayed in a nice cabin in rural Virginia for cheap. We stayed in a ritzy presidential suite in Washington, D.C. for dirt cheap as well. This was back when the internet wasn't as popular, so I'm not sure that these rental timeshares are still a thing now. I could go on, but overall my childhood was a lot of fun even if my parents were stingy. I feel like their stinginess really helped us go so many places as kids because they were driven to find all these free events because, in the end, it was really fun for them to do. Well, good on you for seeing the silver lining. And it seems like their stinginess might have been your parents' thing as a couple. It seems like they thrived doing it together. Just goes to show there's someone for everyone. My father gets free boxes at the post office. Free as in you're supposed to fill it, bring it back and pay to ship it. He skips that part and just takes the priority mailboxes home with him. Didn't know about this routine until around Valentine's Day when we were running errands and he said he had to stop to get a free gift box for my mum. Sometimes he'll grab a couple of the cushy bubble envelopes to roll up and use as filler to keep the gift safe. My mum is the opposite. She always buys boxes, wrap, tissue paper, ribbons and tags, so at least one of them supports the gift decor industry. Sorry, USPS. So I work at a grocery store, and every year we have a donation competition for muscular dystrophy. We have people sign and buy shamrocks that go on the walls, and we have a small cup for change donations. One day a lady comes in, very rude, resting witch face. Everything's a problem, you get it. So as I was checking her out, she digs through her wallet looking for a $100 bill, and the order was $53.59. She found the bill, and instead of taking change, she goes, "Looks like there's 59 cents in here," and digs 59 cents from the donation cup. I wanted to say something, but she would have made a scene. Instead, I just threw $1 into the cup. Bought a cheap imitation cell phone case that looked like one from OtterBox, destroyed it, and went to the OtterBox shop to get a replacement. There's a big fishing tournament every summer near me, and the people that set it up go to Home Depot and buy like $2,000 worth of flowers and then just return them after the event. Worked at Wendy's one summer when I was in high school. This one guy would come in and order a large size of fries. He'd dump half of the fries into the bag and come back and say that he wanted fresh fries and that these ones tasted too stale. I only caught what he was doing because I'd noticed that one of the times he complained, the fries had just come out of the fryer. Hang out with a group of friends, about 6 to 7 people, and we decide to chip in for a large meal except for one guy, who said he's not that hungry because he just ate. When the meal arrived, we all started eating and chatting at the same time, and that guy just kept eating, and once he was done, he pretended he got a call and left us. My friend went to stay with a new boyfriend who she'd met on eHarmony. They'd met a few times before, talked on the phone loads, and hadn't spent that much time together. On her first night there, he poured them each a glass of red wine. She was exhausted and only drank half of her glass before she was ready to go to bed. He put the glass with the remaining wine in the refrigerator. The next morning with breakfast, he pulled the glass out of the fridge. She didn't touch it. Again, he put it back in the refrigerator. Again, that night for dinner, he pulled the glass out and ended up putting it back in the refrigerator. At this point, she wasn't drinking it on principle. The next night, they went to a function at a hotel. She did drink a glass of wine there, and he tipped $1 to the bartender. When they got home, he pulled up QuickBooks and entered the $1 into his budget. She left the next day. Yep, he pulled out the glass of wine as she was packing to go. She finally snatched the glass and downed it in one giant gulp. She said it was disgusting. That was the last time they ever saw each other. What is the most WTF random thing that someone you know does for a job? My uncle used to work in a psych ward as a security guy. He did the overnights, and his supervisor told him, "You sleep your shift away, and if something happens that wakes you up, you get me ASAP." He basically got paid to sleep for 8 hours. I had a job at a soda company. My job was to monitor the defect bins. Cans came off the line, dented, half full, and were automatically kicked into separate bins. My job was to open the cans, pour the soda on the floor, and throw away the can. I was a soda pourer. I'm friends with someone that's a personal assistant for the wife of a CEO of a company. The company employs her, and she's the assistant to the wife who doesn't work for the company. The lady doesn't work, but apparently needs someone to do minor, normal tasks for her and drive her around. She's on call for her 24/7, but has never received a call after 9 p.m. in the last 4 years. She does maybe 3 hours of actual work each day and then hangs out with the lady for the rest of the time. They let her use their Miami Beach condo for 2 weeks of a year for free as well. I'm glad she knows how lucky this job is, otherwise it would annoy me a whole lot more. I work at a local science center playing a character called Indiana Bones. I get paid to dress up, talk to kids about dinosaurs, and play make-believe in front of a pre-recorded video. I know a guy who works for some branch of the Louisiana government. His job is literally to drive around the marshes in a boat and destroy an invasive species of cactus. He developed his own method of doing this, which entails him seeing the cactus, using a compound bow to tag said cactus, and then torching it with a blowtorch. He's tried a few times to convince his boss to buy him a flamethrower so he doesn't have to leave the boat, but so far he's been unsuccessful in that. My brother-in-law is a professional jouster. He works for a company that travels to Renaissance fairs, and he owns his own custom suit of armor. I mean, that's an awesome job. I have to hope that he actually has health insurance for it though, and doesn't just do it on a contract basis, because that career has a high likelihood of horrific life-changing injury even today. Still, very, very cool. A buddy of mine got paid to do minor inspection and take readings at remote cell towers and repeaters in the mountains in Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico. They provided a pretty awesome monster of a truck for him, maps, GPS coordinates, and the contact for who owns the land they're leasing from. He then makes his way up however he can. In his words, "I basically just make sure it's still there." I worked a factory job for a while. There was a guy on the second shift who was a bit on the simple side and liked straightforward repetitive tasks. He was a trifle tapper. He'd stand on the production line at the point where the sealed trifles came out of the cold room and into the packing area, and with his gloved hands, he'd tap on the top of each trifle firmly to check the seal was good. We'd had some problems with the heat sealing machines. The tubs would look sealed but not be airtight, and the product would spoil in transit. It was cheaper to pay for the guy to tap away at minimum wage than it was to replace the machine, I guess, and he was happy enough. I worked with a guy who hosted a adult content website. All of the videos are just attractive women getting slime poured on top of them. They're even wearing clothes while this happens. He'd take vacations and film different aspiring models doing this. He pulls in about $5,000 a month just for doing this. I manage a Mongolian folk metal band, and that pretty much covers my bills. So, that. It's me. I get paid to live censor various high-risk live TV and radio shows. It's only a contract or two a year, but I'm one of only 2 people in my country that can do it. My friend's full-time job is running a 2020 cricket competition. He plays in a handful of teams and basically drinks beer and plays all week. For those asking, it's in Australia, although it's actually a global competition. It's called Last Man Stands. They recently brought the Maasai Warriors team out as a fundraiser for the primary club. My friend trades Magic the Gathering cards like they're stocks, makes between $25 and $30K a year doing it. That reminds me of my Magic the Gathering days, pulling a foiled jewel land from a Ravnica booster pack. Some fat kid with a rolly backpack offered me $40 for it. Frick yeah! I turned around and brought another booster pack and pulled a different foiled jewel land. Fat kid begrudgingly bought that one for $40 as well. I hear the sirens call. I must resist. My friend rubs lotion on her feet and streams that on the internet. People are weird. One of my mates genuinely shovels number 2 for a living and loves it. Says the pay is proper healthy too for what he describes as a job where the only qualifications required are 2 functioning arms. I had a friend who wrote adult film reviews for a living. The actors were beautiful, but I didn't really believe the storyline. What teacher would be so flippant about his career not to lock the door of the classroom before doing the deed with 2 of his students at once? What school uniform policy requires such short skirts and allows, nay, encourages that level of chest on display?
Also, the quadratic formula was written on the chalkboard, even though this was an English class. 3 stars. Importing cheap furniture from India, painting them in a way that looks Indian to Europeans, but nobody in India would call Indian, and then selling that for a crap ton of money. A friend of mine dropped out of art college to do it. I know a guy who did this with rugs from the Middle East. He was in the army, and while overseas, I can't remember the country, he would buy these things for maybe a couple of hundred on a high end, bring them here, and they'd sell for thousands of dollars. He has a couple of rugs that sold for more than 10 grand. So he takes that money and buys a few $1,000s worth of rugs, instead of like $300, buys a crap ton, sends them home, and his wife sells them while he's spraying bullets. Comes home, and he's now retired at like 40 years old. I used to have a job where I'd scan women's chests into a computer all day, every day, digitizing a mammography film storage library. It was way less interesting than it sounds. I used to have a friend who wrote the funny comments between TV shows telling people what's coming up next for a particular channel. For example, "And up next it's going to be a whale of a night in Extreme Fishing Live," or whatever. He makes more money than I currently do. I guess I should have done a creative writing degree like him. Just to clarify, it's an extremely difficult and creative job and one that I absolutely couldn't do. My kindergarten hired several ladies to wait at the restroom and wipe off kids' mess after they went number 2. That's their only job, nothing else. My buddy has his own startup called Cyrano. He ghostwrites personal ads, responses, and texts for lonely guys. For his premium package, he'll feed you lines into your Bluetooth earpiece while you're out on an actual date. The narrator doesn't think that any lines that this gentleman could feed you could possibly overcome the weirdness of wearing a damn Bluetooth headset during a date, let alone the delays while you listen to his script. But hey, apparently people are willing to pay for this, so what do I know? I drive around and set up and take down bouncy castles all day. I meet some characters, to say the least. My job, I think, is pretty ridiculous. I look over and take care of around 70 sled dogs. My best friend has been, quote, unemployed for about the last year, but he makes more money than I do selling Magic the Gathering cards like playing the stock market. He buys low and then sells the cards once they've jumped up in value, and he's started like a self-help clan in Clash of Clans. He streams 5 nights a week and will do one-on-one help with building bases and critiquing attacks that people in the clan send him. His system is that for a $10 donation on Twitch, he'll do 2 10-minute critiques, either of your base or your attack, and make suggestions. He does this for hours every day and makes really good money. A friend of mine makes puppets and masks for theaters. A friend's husband used to scrub the turtle shells at a local marine rehab center. It's certainly not super ridiculous, but I found out a guy I play hockey with makes his living from buying things from the LL Bean, the North Face, Patagonia, all these outlets, and marking them up on eBay and selling them to people in countries where these brands just aren't available in retail. I imagine this is fairly common, it just seems like a ridiculous job. A day of work just consists of going shopping, listing things on eBay, dealing with PayPal transactions and other customer service matters, and dropping things off at the UPS store. Somewhere out there is a person who's paid to eat good food and to drink good wine and write about how good the food is. And guess what? They put it on their blogs with a crap ton of pictures and vague comments like, "The steak was rich and flavorful," or "The ramen was rich and flavorful," or "I love how the pesto was rich and flavorful." You know, as someone who's currently looking for a job, hearing about these other things is incredibly frustrating. I'm a rocket scientist. You'd think all the jokes would get old. Well, you're goddamn right. Dethorning roses. I mean, every rose has its thorns, so it's good business to get into. I know someone who's basically employed because they have a beard. Essentially, he's a pretend barman in a museum bar. He's not allowed to serve drinks, but instead just tells people about the history of Shakespeare. The whole place is set up to look like it would in the 16th century, and he's described as a 16th century baron based on his appearance and fine beard, so he fits right in. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel.
The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. A friend of mine drives around the country buying cheap crap at thrift stores and selling them for a profit on Amazon. There's like this whole community that does it. A girl who I know, and yes, I know you're always looking at stuff like this on the internet, hi, once told me that as an odd job she used to translate adult flicks into Russian. I can't remember if it was the dialogue or just the titles, but she told me it was hard because Russian doesn't really do puns. One of my school friends literally ran away and joined the circus. She's a gymnast. Cow inseminator. Sometimes I go to places where a bunch of people are sitting in chairs all facing the same direction. I'll stand in front of them, sometimes with a microphone, and tell them stories about things that happened to me. Sometimes they laugh, and the guy who owns the chairs will give me incredibly small amounts of money. Before I was in stand-up, a lot of the other ridiculous jobs I've had happened while I was in the military. For a few years, I was stationed at Quantico, where they manufacture shiny new Marine officers. There were entire platoons full of lieutenants, and when they crap in the woods, one of the jobs enlisted men like me had to take turns doing was disposing of their number 2 with fire. The ground was frozen, so we constructed makeshift loos from old ammo crates and metal tubs, and when they were close to full, someone would dump kerosene into the tubs, light a match, and stir until it was nothing but ash. For some reason, they never put "stirring a flaming pot of officer number 2" on the recruiting posters. Another thing they did at Quantico was attend etiquette classes. These guys and girls would eventually have to hobnob with generals and congressmen, but surprisingly few of them knew about cloth napkins or which fork to use. There's even a huge banquet for each class with hundreds of tuxedo-clad guests, silver candelabras, and cigars. As a young corporal, it was my job to lead them through this maze of thank you cards and proper salutes. I wonder if any of them ever recognized me as the guy who stirred their turds. I have a friend who used to render and animate Minecraft adult flicks for $50 per finished minute of animation. It's weird and gross, but $100 is $100. My friend figures out why bombs, rockets, and tanks didn't work correctly. I recently met someone who introduced himself as a vegan philosopher. Not really sure what that means. Well, I think that there was a high likelihood that this particular person was unemployed, but I won't discount anything. Like for instance, this year we found out you can be a professor of breakdancing if you live in Australia, even if that position might not exist much longer due to current events. So you never know. My friend's brother is a fairly successful YouTuber. It's an odd job if you think about it, regardless of how used to it we are now. An old friend's dad made a huge amount of money reselling paper cups. I was invited to his beachfront property for a ride on his boat when he told me this. He apparently got brought in as an independent contractor, aka terrible commission-only gig, for a paper products company. He then turned around and landed a deal to supply every McDonald's franchise in 3 states with their cups. A few years later, he did the same thing for Wendy's. By the time his contract expired, he had made enough money to retire. A close friend of mine has recently told me they were drunkenly writing sci-fi on Reddit, and people started throwing money at them for it. It's nothing major, but it's growing into enough to cover their gas and coffee money. I didn't believe them, but I eventually searched their pseudonym author name, and they weren't lying, and it's actually not bad once you get past the first few chapters. I'm oddly proud of them. I know someone who makes a living mailing her wee-wee across the states for people to consume while they tickle their pickle. I'm currently on my way to becoming a doctor of robots. In the meantime, I teach robots to put children through rehab. Got a buddy who quit his job to paint styrofoam. We worked at the same place, and now he makes a lot more than me. Okay, I'll be less cryptic. He makes custom terrain for miniature games. Painting styrofoam is a bit of a simplification, but it's the best way to describe his job with brevity. I used to have a roommate who worked at an assisted living facility. The ridiculous part was she would work 40-hour weeks over the course of 2 days. She'd leave Friday evening for work straight through and take a sleep break Saturday evening, then work the rest of her shift until coming home late Sunday evening. Turns out good assistants are worth their weight in gold. My sister lives in assisted accommodation and their helpers are the nicest, sweetest people. Feels good knowing that they're there should something happen, although she lives by herself in a little flat in the building. My friend builds Lego things straight out of the box for display. Almost related, but so many office jobs of people I know could be replaced with a really easy Excel macro. It seems ridiculous to me. Shh, my job mostly exists because people can't seem to grasp that Excel is not just a fancy table maker. Adult material historian. Big deal, I do that too, but I don't get paid for it and my hard drive is almost full. I know someone who works for a company that looks after some UK properties of super wealthy Arabs. They charge a fortune to make sure the property is in order so that if someone in the family wants to use it, it's ready. This is generally for 2 weeks of the year, and sometimes whole years can go past with nobody using them. Her job is to manage the stuff that is subcontracted out to local gardeners and cleaners. A fraternity buddy of mine works on super yachts across the world. Started as a deckhand and is moving up the ladder. He gets paid well, travels to over 150 countries now, and is getting paid on Instagram due to the locations he's been to. I'm jealous of his life, but maybe that's because I'm currently looking outside to snow on April 7th from an office cubicle. Research to determine how alcohol and various illegal substances affect the decision-making of primates. Basically, he gets monkeys drunk or high. Panda hugging. You get paid to hug pandas for about 7 hours a day for about 24 grand a year. I can't even imagine. Whatever Kim Kardashian does. I knew of a guy once that was an adult flick promo editor. He'd often get sent clips and was told to take out the naughty bits for TV airing purposes. My friend is the token white guy at some company in China. He's about 6'4" with a giant well-kept beard. I have no clue what the company does, but my friend sits in on all these meetings and nods a lot during them. There's a couple who live in the same building as me. He's a parkour instructor and she's a trapeze artist. Talk about your power couples. He doesn't do it anymore, but a guy I worked with was a AIM assistant on a stud farm. Dear viewers, I'm going to be completely frank with you. That submission was very different before I edited substantial parts of it to be appropriate for YouTube. Possibly the most I've worked for one tiny sentence ever. Now you know. I have a friend who dissolves dead bodies for the county he lives in. When the deceased doesn't have anyone to pay for a funeral or family to be present, the county will just dissolve the dead bodies in acid, after cutting them into smaller, more manageable pieces. He also cuts the bodies because synergy is a thing. There is no way that chopping up a human and dissolving them in acid, then dealing with acid human goop is less expensive or simple than simple cremation. I know a friend whose profession is referred to as a penetration tester. Basically, he gets hired to hack websites as a security test. I don't know if this is really ridiculous. My friend is an Imagineer for Disney. She works on developing new Disney movies and helps create new characters. My aunt sells vegan and gluten-free vending machines. She's also a part-time crystal healer and Reiki master, and Trump supporter. There's a not-so-close friend of mine who works as a pig manual servicer, a pigwinker if you replace the I with an A. It's apparently his official job title. I think he sells the splooge or something. I really don't want to ask. My friend works for the city operating a drawbridge. He sits in a control room, which has a bed, a couch, and a TV, for 12 hours at a time and waits for boats to come. When they do, about 3 times a week, he gets up from what he's doing and hits the big red button which lifts the bridge. When it passes, he hits the button again, and it goes down. I asked him once what his busiest day was. 4 boats. 4 fricking boats. I met a guy at a bar whose entire job was engineering the dimples on golf balls. All he did all day was look at balls, which cracked drunk me up quite a bit. My dumb, idiot, deadbeat, substance-using dad traps fricking pigeons for a living. He used to be a used cars salesman. I write adult magazines. I know a guy that just draws with chocolate on plates all day. That's pretty ridiculous. The guy is me. I like my job, but I think it's absurd how much people pay me for fancy chocolate stuff. Guy I went to school with owns a food-grade mushroom farm, and from what I can tell, he's doing exceedingly well at it. Seriously though, if there was ever two people you'd look at and say, that guy is going to own a mushroom farm one day, it would be him and his wife. He found his calling and enjoys what he does. I drive around to doctors' offices to copy medical records. Not get them emailed, mind you. I can't because the systems still can't give a complete medical record. Drive around all day copying records. Green herb quality tester in Colorado. A friend of mine lives, well, I might add, solely from gambling on sports. Selling AdvoCare, essential oils, Thrive, or any of those other pyramid scheme materials on Facebook. My cousin used to get paid to dress up like a clown and let tourists shoot paintballs at him in New York City. I bait fishhooks for rich people at a local country club. The first couple of years I didn't get paid much because I was just an apprentice baiter, but after a while I was promoted to master... baiter. I hate the person who submitted that. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.